paper. The angel came to him in it and asked him to read. The prophet replied, I do not know how to read. The angel caught me forcefully and pressed me so hard that I could not bear it anymore. He then released me and asked me to read. And I replied, I do not know how to read. Whereupon he caught me again and pressed me a second time until I could not bear it anymore. Then he released me and asked me again to read. But again I replied, I do not know how to read. Or, what shall I read? Thereupon he caught me for the third time and pressed me and then released me and said, read in the name of your Lord, who has created all that exists. He has created man from a clot. Read, and your Lord is most generous, up to that which he knew not. Then Muhammad returned with the inspiration, his neck muscles twitching with terror, till he entered upon Khadijah and said, cover me, cover me. They covered him till his fear was over. And then he said, oh Khadijah, what is wrong with me? Then he told her everything that had happened and said, I fear that something may happen to me. Khadijah said, never, but have the glad tidings, for by Allah, Allah will never disgrace you, as you keep good relations with your kin and kith. Speak the truth, help the poor and the destitute, serve your guests generously, and assist the deserving, calamity-afflicted ones. Khadijah then accompanied him to her cousin Waraqah bin Nawfal bin Asad bin Abdul Uzza, long name, who during the pre-Islamic period became a Christian and used to write the writing with Hebrew letters. He would write from the gospel in Hebrew as much as Allah wished him to write. He was an old man and had lost his weight. Khadijah said to Waraqah, listen to the story of your nephew, O my cousin. Waraqah said, O my nephew, what have you seen? Allah's apostle described whatever he had seen. Waraqah said, this is the same one who keeps the secrets, Angel Gabriel, whom Allah has sent to Moses. I wish I were young and could live up to the time where your people would turn you out. Muhammad asked, will they drive me out? Waraqah replied in the affirmative and said, anyone, man, who came with something similar to what you have brought was treated with hostility. And if I should remain alive till the day when you will be turned out, then I would support you strongly. But after a few days, Waraqah died, and the divine inspiration was also paused for a while. And the prophet became so sad, as we have heard, that he intended several times to throw himself from the tops of high mountains. And every time he went up to the top of a mountain in order to throw himself down, Gabriel would appear before him and say, O Muhammad, you are indeed Allah's apostle of truth. Whereupon his heart will become quiet and he will calm down and will return home. And whenever the period of the calming of the inspiration used to become long, he would do as before. But when he used to reach the top of a mountain, Gabriel would appear before him and say to him what he has said before. There are a number of slight variations to this story, related by different people, describing Muhammad's visitation by a spirit, identifying himself as the angel Gabriel. These stories do not always agree with each other in perfect detail, but on the whole, a complete picture can be drawn of Muhammad's initial experience with the spirit and his reactions after. And that's what I just presented. From this encounter, Muslims believe that Allah, through the archangel Gabriel, gave the collection of revelations to Muhammad that are now preferred as the Islamic scriptures.
Shalom, shalom, family. As always, at the 10-minute mark, we're going to say the Lord's Prayer. So bow with me as we say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, honored be thy name. May thy kingdom come. May thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us of our trespasses as forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us on a righteous path, and guard us from the evil one. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, family. So real fast, just gonna turn this down real fast. So shalom, 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 shalom. So today we're gonna be doing something a little different. I'm gonna be reviewing something that I had recently come across. I find it very evident for a lot of these things that we see. This is gonna be a very interesting review for the sake of understanding. But I'm gonna do this once and have this set here. Have it set aside for any references to this. This has to do with when we look at the scriptures, when we look at different things like that, we have to understand that there's a certain people in there that's lost, right? We know today many people talk about the lost tribe of Israel. For the sake of understanding, there are two groups of people today that are strongly standing on that they are the Israelites. We have one group that is going to be Caucasian. They're going to be a little paler skin. We're going to have one group with a more darker skin tone. These are known today as Hebrew Israelites. Today we're going to do for the sake of understanding, a perfect historical reference showing and displaying who is who for the sake of understanding. So this is going to be historical. You're going to see genetic information. You're going to see maybe a GPS study for the sake of understanding. So today, that's what we're going to do today. Now, for the sake of understanding, we're going to go about this bit by bit. So if there's any questions, we're going to touch on those as we go about this. But this is what a note we usually talk about. So a little bit of evidence when we look at leprosy and certain things like that. We look at the Egyptians and what the Egyptians look like. There's some things that we don't need to debate on. For example, we know that the Bible says the Egyptians are Hamites. What would Hamites look like? They'll be a darker skin tone. So we understand that, right? But what we want to do today is look at some historical writings. Now, we obviously imagery makes a big understanding. But today, we're going to see some documents. And some of these things, for the sake of understanding, it takes a little bit of skill to go through. So I'm going to let a video play, and we're going to look at it. And if there's any questions, anyone has any questions on it, definitely ask. Because each one of these, what I try to do, also try to sit and find, like, for example, like some of the maps and things like that, to find the information myself to see if these can be double verified, which, not that I didn't believe them, but it's always good to have that extra verification for some things. And a lot of this was double verified, which, for the sake of understanding, I had put some on and some things on the Discord for the side so that things can help for learning and different things like that. But let me grab one of those real fast. So we'll go to some of these things that are separate for the side, but let's actually see this. Now, I believe competition really influences the best out of a person. Now, this individual, he was in, not for the sake of a confusion, understand this, that it's not that he had like, for example, when we look at debates and things like that, there's a difference between a debate and proving a statement, right? A debating leads to fighting where people argue, but laying down facts ends a debate. Understand that. Laying down information that's proven, there's no way to debate against it. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to skip the first 5 minutes, and I'm going to go up to the 5-minute mark. And what he's doing here, he's going to be displaying information. All these things are going to be pure facts. That's all he's going to show here is just pure facts. And these things are going to be very important to understand that this was between two or different individuals. So it could be multiple individuals when it comes to these things that can influence someone to bring out. The scripture says, a wise man draws out what's in him, for the sake of understanding. So when you hold information, whatever you find, when it's solid information, that's when you want to bring forth what you have. So this is just an example of that. So I'm going to let it play. once I figure out. Some things are just very, very precious, I think. And sometimes those things can be sometimes interrupted. So right now, get a little interruption right now. So we'll see what's up. Otherwise, I'll do what sometimes I would do, as in doing a force reset. All right, 1 second. Let me see if we can do a force reset. I'll be right back. All right, all right. So I had a quick, I don't know what just happened, but that's all right. We're going to continue on. Everything's back running. We're going to continue on where we left. So for Shannon, let's see. I'm going to press.
Either she knows it exists and she's lying, or either she doesn't know it exists and she should stop calling herself an apologist and stop speaking up on evidence as if she knows it to be fact when she hasn't done the research. So I'm going to show you this here today. First place we're going to start with is Yale. Yale is a university. This map is from 1774, Yale. So the first thing I'm going to show you, because her and Damon Richardson lied and said Judah wasn't on the west coast of Africa. It wasn't named after them. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a map from 1774. This is Africa, performed by the Senior Danville under the patronage of the Duke of Orleans, revised and improved by Mr. Bolden and E. Bowen. Emmanuel Bowen is the one who made the map that we see the most. I believe it's the 1747 map. We see that the most because it's part of his famous collection in which it shows Judah on the west coast of Africa, the kingdom of Judah. And they say that that map has been debunked. But here Emmanuel Bowen works on another map that they claim. Remember, they will tell you that they've debunked a lot of the Israelite evidence. Yet they don't touch this map right here, 1774, another map Emmanuel Bowen worked on for the Duke of Orleans. We're going to look at this map bigger. Still, you see library.yale.edu. This map has been enlarged already because it's such a large file. It takes a few seconds to get bigger. So Negrisha. Now, remember, she said we misinterpret this evidence. We make this evidence up, right? Now, I'm going to build a case. I'm going to slowly build this case up because I want you to see how thoroughly and how much information there is for her to sit there and lie and say this information outright does not exist. So right here, according to Idrisi, the land hereabout was peopled by Jews. According to Idrisi, the land hereabout was peopled by Jews.
Just for the sake of understanding, I'm going to go to this. Make sure it is good. Okay, so I'm going to go and let's pull up a note. Let's go down and let's look at this. All right, so what is he talking about? What is he talking about? He's talking about a saying that's on that map. The saying that's right on the map. Right here. This is the saying. This is the map. This is the site. This is the actual site where you can get this map. You can see he had copied it and he has a link to the site and everything. So I'll let that open real fast. But this is what it's reading. On the map, This map is really, really old, right? For the sake of understanding, this map, go up here. This is a French map made in 1766 for the Duke of Orleans, right? If you look just under one of the labels, right, for the sake of understanding, this is what it reads. This is what it reads right here. The land whereby was populated by Jews, right? This is very important because the location, the history, everything, one thing about truth synchronizes. All truth synchronizes. So that's one of the things that we actually see, that truth constantly moves forward to truth. You're going to find more and more evidence that confirm itself, right? If this is not something that is just random, something that is just not mixing with anything else, there's dozens of maps that have the same thing and it's on the same location, the certain location, right? We had looked at this before. This location is well known, right? There's a lot of other people that have showed this map before. For the sake of understanding, I'm gonna go up a little bit. Actually, I'll go here. That's where is that? Here it is. This is another time. That one was 1766. This one would be 1742 or 47 for the sake of understanding, but let's just make sure that that's exactly what we're looking at here. So this is the actual site. This is a real site with another map, right? You can see Library of Congress, right? I'm gonna click the map. We had looked at this the other day. See this little map right here? It just shows us what we're looking at here. And then here's that area that is actually talking about. It's talking about how the people was living over here. That's why it's called the Kingdom of Judah, right? But let's let it play. Let's continue on and let it play.
This is the west coast of Africa. You can see this right here. This is the area I'm looking at.
So you can see right there.
Right here where the yellow box is. This is the area, Lamlin, right here. Now we come down here and read this square right here. It says all from the head of the Sanaga is very little known, but the situation of this great region as described may joined with the knowledge of Idrisi, the Nubian geographer, and Leo the African, agrees with several new discoveries, all uniting to verify their accounts. I therefore conclude that the Niger flows from west to east and has an affinity with the Sanaga, or has no affinity with the Sanaga or any part thereof, but falls into the lakes that communicate with the river Nile. So now, he's talking about the Niger River. The Niger River is going to come up again, and that's why I read that. So now, this area right here is peopled by Jews. The Niger River is mentioned here. You see the kingdom of the Dahomey, whose prince subdued the states of Ardra and Wida, W-I-D-A, pay attention to the spelling, about the year 1724. You see Ardra here, you see Wida here, on the slave coast. Ardra, Wida. Remember Wida, W-I-D-A, because this is where Nefertiti and Damon Richardson tried to lie and say had nothing to do with the tribe of Judah. So now, this map, all these links will be in the description to the maps and everything else. So now, right here, this is a French website, gallica.bnf.fr. This is a French website. This is from 1890, May 1st, 1890. So we go down to here. Let me make sure. All right, text. Now, I'm going to copy part of this text, right? Wida, Fida, we're going to grab this right here. Now, their whole point was, we're going to come back to this. I'm going to pull her up again. Their whole point was that Wida was not named after the tribe of Judah. So now what I'm going to do is a French to English translation. And I'm going to paste the text into here that I just copied. Now, according to Google Translate, you see me do this right here. Wida, Fida, Weda, Awida, Juda, or a Judah is a city old, frequented since the 16th century by Portuguese slavers. This word is split up, but it's supposed to be Portuguese. Portuguese slavers who gave it its name. Its inhabitants were said to be Judoquays, and they were indeed considered to be a remnant of scattered tribes of Israel. To the north, the Alala River, whose real name is Ephra, had become Euphrates for scholars. So now, it says they were indeed considered to be a remnant of scattered tribes of Israel. So now we are establishing that this land called Wida or Wida contained people who were said to be this one of the scattered tribes of Israel, right? This is in this French document.
Right, just for the sake of understanding, just to summarize basically what happened during when the Romans had invaded Jerusalem. See, what many people have a concept that they went straight into Africa. They actually, for the sake of understanding, there was some that went to Africa, but there were some that most of them went upwards, right? You have a lot that went upwards that went to the Portuguese. Very important to understand that a lot of documents that are recorded of them being up there. It records how they looked. It records what they did and everything about their traditions, and it records who they were. And then it records how they got tired of them. The Portuguese, they got tired of them, and very, very, very early, right? That's why you start to see a lot of them around in Africa, because they were all forced downward. Understand, in fact, there's more. That's very important history that many people don't know about. That's a very important history that has to do with the time of the Islamic slave trade. Which, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you the time around what happened in the time of the Islamic slave trade. See, the Judeans were actually persecuted by almost everyone around that time. The Judeans were persecuted about we're going to talk about that before the first century even came to pass. Let's actually look at something real fast. We'll go to a note, and I just want to open something. And the reason why this is because history, understanding actual history is important to understand. Understand history. Don't think you're going to understand prophecy, because history is needed to understand prophecy. It's very important to understand it. Otherwise, we'll see people miss. Shalom, 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 family. So I don't know, maybe they don't want this information coming out, but this is some real. There's going to be some very, very serious information today. It's going to be this probably be one of the most serious pieces of information that if someone was to bring this to a mass of people, this will really open up some eyes for the sake of understanding. But let's get back into what we're going to look at is the time. Now, this is important to understand. A lot of people go to the time. We already talked about the bottleneck in 1300s. If you don't remember that, we had talked about how the evidence pointing to the Ashkenazi, the conversion, is a lot of things that we need to understand. The bottleneck, the information on the bottleneck shows genetically we have a problem when it comes to documentation, right? But let's understand something about documentation. We can go to a time and we can find the time frame when things changed. Watch what we show here, because it's actually going to be very, very important for vital information. It's going to be very important for vital information for the sake of understanding. And what I'm going to do, I think it's actually here. Let's look and see if it's right. Maybe it's somewhere up here. Not here. Let's grab it from here. Let's go up a little bit. And I'm going to go to this one on here. I'm going to go to one on here. But first, we're going to continue with this, and then we'll go to the one on here. And then once we go to the one on here, we'll talk about that. But first, let's talk about this moment in time. I'll leave this one right here, because I'm going to talk about this thing. Very important with this one. We'll look at this one. But first, before we look at that one, I want to show you this. Let's see if it opens. So I'm going to close this map. We already looked at that. See if it's also here. I'll leave this one. This one, we'll look at that one too. So first, let's look at it like this. I want to make sure this map opens up so I can show you this. I want you to see this. So it's important to understand about the 1700s. That was an event that had happened. Almost about even close to the 1800s. That was an event that had happened. It's recorded. It's very hard to find the information on this, but you can find this information just with a little help. Now, it's important to understand during the time of the slave trade, that's not where you don't look. You're going to find a lot of information there, yes, and which this is going to show a lot of information. But it's important to understand what had happened before the time of the slave trade. So I'm going to go down. I'm going to show you something that's actually very important to understand. In a time about the 1600s, or not 1600, 600 AD, about that time, there was an Islamic slave trade, actually about 650 AD. I'm going to let this play real fast, and then we'll go back to that. And I want you first to know about this. I want you to know about what happened. And if you're familiar with what happened with the fall of Jerusalem, the first fall, what had happened? Babylon sieged it, and then came the time where the Amorites had paid Ishmael. When Ishmael had came and was persecuting the people. This was something that was common. That Ishmael, every time something would happen, they would persecute him. As we know, Ishmael will be of the Egyptians, for the sake of understanding, a mix of them, because we have the understanding that they were part Shem, part Ham, but then they also later on mixed with a little bit of Esau, for the sake of understanding. That's why their shades a little different. But watch what you see here.
I must admit that I too, among hundreds of millions of educated people, was under the impression that the African slave trade was the sole responsibility of the Christian Europeans, the white race. That is, until I started exploring the subject in greater depth, and especially after reading an incredibly enlightening book called The Legacy of Arab Islam in Africa by John Alambila Azuma. My whole perspective and understanding has changed dramatically, and I would like you to tell us more about this subject. The success of Muhammadan Islam in deceiving, misinforming, deforming, and contorting both history and reality over a period of almost 1400 years has been astounding. That is, until now. The greatest tragedy about this particular subject is that most of the descendants of African slavery, the black people in the Americas, around the world, as well as among the African blacks, are totally ignorant of the actual facts. Before we lose the concentration of our listeners, I would like to make the following statement and then prove it. That the worst, most inhumane and most diabolical institution of the black African slave trade was initiated, refined, perpetrated, and implemented by the Mohammedan Arabs and later aided and abetted by the black converts to Mohammedan Islam. I predict that, as usual, the two subcultures, those of denial of facts and of political correctness will attack us without once disproving a single statement and or conclusion that we make. Slavery was not created by the white races, because it has existed throughout human history and practiced by every tribe, culture, civilization, racial group, and religion. In fact, the very word slavery has its root in the name Slav, based upon the Slavic peoples of Europe who were subjugated by other Europeans. It is not common knowledge that the Arabic word abd is synonymous with the meaning of slave. For example, Abdullah means literally the slave of Allah, and that in the language of the Arabs, all black peoples are called abid, plural, for slaves. While much has been written concerning the...
Very important information. Did you hear what it just said? Anyone of dark skin, anyone during the is now. Why was it like this? If you know a little bit about what David Wood, he went over a little talk of how Muhammad and a lot of them had a very strong want for people of a certain skin tone. A lot of people, when they think about certain skin tone, when people were trying, like for example, the Nazis, the KKK, certain groups like that were trying to make people a certain skin tone. People don't know that actually when the Muslims were going, now the original Muslims were actually darker skinned. If you do the research, you'll find out that a lot of the Muslims originally was darker skinned, but they started to become lighter and lighter and lighter, and then they started to hate it darker and darker and more. So right here, they actually started to separate themselves. It's very important to understand that they separated themselves from anyone who was of a darker skin race. And they actually persecuted anyone who was like that. And understand this, you're going to see today that the Judeans were actually a darker skin race too. Understand, watch, you're going to see this.
Transatlantic slave trade.
But before we continue with this, understand the time frame here, right? It's going to be about, let's actually go to here just to get an idea of this Islamic slave trade for the sake of understanding. Because when we think about the Islamic slave trade, if you're not familiar with it, it may sound like something new or something that was probably like recent or something like that. But this was actually a long time ago. Very important to understand that the people of Israel, they went into every single country. And this is known today. You're going to see actually the historical evidence for these things, that the persecution that they was actually facing when they were pushed downward into what you can see down here, for the sake of understanding, these were persecuted on almost every border of Africa, but mainly in one area. And we're going to look at that today, how it targeted this one area, how they was all forced in this one area. And in that one area, you're going to see a lot of different things that's very important. So the Islamic slave trade, that was something that was very early for the sake of understanding, but you're going to hear it right here. You're going to get the understanding.
Surprisingly, little attention has been paid to the Islamic slave trade across the Sahara, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. While the European involvement in the African transatlantic slave trade to the Americas lasted for just over 3 centuries, the Arab involvement in the African slave trade has lasted 14 centuries, and in some parts of the Mohammedan world is still continuing to this day.
So now understand this. It says it's been continuing for 14 centuries because if we understand the Islamic slave trade was about 650 AD. And then later on, you continue on to this day. It's a long time. That's a slave trade that's still low-key happening. Think if you ever do some research, look up the Ivory slave trade.
The birth of Mohammedan Islam and its conquests brought about the birth of institutionalized, systematized, and religiously sanctioned slave trade on a massive and global scale. In fact, the Quran allows the taking of slaves as booty or reward for wars of aggression against any and all unbelievers, most of the human population. This has led to an enormous number of so-called holy wars, jihad in Arabic. There was and is absolutely nothing holy about these wars, which are primarily to plunder, slaughter, rape, subjugate, and rob other human beings of their wealth, produce, freedom, and dignity. Mohammedan Muslim states and tribes attacked other non-Muslim groups to achieve these objectives. Although Islamic jurisprudence laid down regulations for the treatment of slaves, however, incredible and heinous abuses have occurred throughout the history of Mohammedan Islam. By the Middle Ages, the Arabic word abd was in general used to denote a black slave.
So that's a good question. That question right there, that is a good question. Now that depends. That depends because, like I was saying, you're gonna see today that some that was in Portugal's. It's important to understand if an Israelite, for the sake of understanding, had mixed in. It's very important to know that a lot of them mixed in with a lot of the people over there. For the sake of understanding, you're gonna see some of those things as it goes through. It's going to show you that when they was up there, they did mix. They did mix with some people. And if they are of the father's line, that's when it kind of gets very important. And then if we go to native, those are two different branches for the sake of understanding, but they do have also information that would lead us to give information to see who they are for the sake of understanding. Like, for example, natives, we got to go about it very carefully. So there's different tribes of natives. There's going to be certain tribes of natives that are Israelites, and certain tribes of natives that are going to be those some of the Japhanites that went over and then had mingled in with some other people. Because it's important to understand, if the father is of Japheth or of another line, Hamite ending, they're not Israelite. But they have to be of the father's line to be considered Israelite for the sake of understanding. But if the father's line did mix in, or if they're more purely, you're going to find large groups of Israelites that will be more like bound together. And we actually have evidence of those two. So technically, that can be a yes. Can Israelites be Latin American and native? Yes. They can also be, in a way, for the sake of understanding, just to give a little understanding, they can also be partly Japheth. Understand it. If the father is Israelite, but the mother is Japheth, they're still an Israelite, for the sake of understanding. And that's quite evident when we go to the scriptures and see where we see sons from where we have Judah. He had mixed in with the Canaanites. Remember Joseph mixed with the with Ham, with Egyptians, and Ephraim and Manasseh still considered Israelites. We also see mix in with other races. Like, for example, Solomon had a son with Amorites, right? Was his children from the Amorites, but that was a woman, and Solomon's the man, so he still would be an Israelite. And also we see some different foundations that Solomon had mixed in with some people that was Hamites, and then those are known as the Solomon dynasty for the sake of understanding. So we got different things like that. So you never know if you might be an Israelite for the sake of understanding. But like I said, with those things, the way that you'll know is a lot of that background, and that stuff we'll look into too. We'll actually pull up some historical information on it, but we have to do each one individually. Like, how do we get the Latin American ones? How do we get the native? How do we get different branches? But today, you're going to see a little information pointing to a common cause that many people that today say that they're Hebrew Israelites, that's backed up by a ton of information, a ton of facts that are traceable all the way back to the origin. So that's just what we're going to show today. And then tomorrow, maybe later this week or the weeks, we'll go over some of those things, just to go over the Latin and the natives for the sake of understanding. Because there is a lot of information when we go and get the direct meat. So real fast, we're going to finish this one and then we'll break some more.
The word Mamluk referred to a white slave. Ibn Khaldun, 1332 to 1406, the preeminent Islamic medieval historian and social thinker, wrote, "The Negro nations are, as a rule, submissive to slavery because they have attributes that are quite similar to dumb animals. It should also be noted that black slaves were castrated based on the assumption that the blacks had an ungovernable sexual appetite. When the Fatimid Caliphate came to power in Egypt, they slaughtered all the tens of thousands of black military slaves and raised an entirely new slave army."
You heard what I just said there? So they're actually, if you do a little history and find out, they actually killed a generation. They killed the generation of people that knew who they were. And understand, a lot of them still retain that information. But it is recorded that this people, out of all the people that they had as slaves, 80% of all everyone who was darker skinned was killed before they entered into slavery. Alone, the Muslim slave, 112 million. It's possible that after the 1400 years, after all those years, it could have been estimated around 140 million for the sake of understanding. And these things are well known. They almost kill. And why would they understand this? Why would they try to annihilate? Why would they almost try to annihilate a people? It's because once you see what you're going to see today, you're going to see the actual information showing you what actually happened and how the people were replaced. You're going to see that today. There's going to be an actual 100% information undeniable. That's what you're going to see today.
Some of these slaves were conscripted into the army at age 10. From Persia to Egypt to Morocco, slave armies from 30,000 to up to 250,000 became commonplace. The Islamic slave trade took place across the Sahara Desert, from the coast of the Red Sea, and from East Africa across the Indian Ocean. The Trans-Sahara trade was conducted along 6 major slave routes. Just in the 19th century, for which we have more accurate records, 1.2 million slaves were brought across the Sahara into the Middle East, as well as a further 450,000 down the Red Sea and 442,000 from the East African coastal ports. That is a total of 2 million black slaves just in the 1800s. At least 8 million more were calculated to have died before reaching the Muslim slave markets. A comparison of the Islamic slave trade to the American slave trade reveals some extremely interesting contrasts. While 2 out of every 3 slaves shipped across the Atlantic were men, the proportions were reversed in the Islamic slave trade. 2 women for every man were enslaved by the Muslims. While the mortality rate of slaves being transported across the Atlantic was as high as 10%, the percentage of slaves dying in transit in the Trans-Sahara and East African slave market was a staggering 80 to 90%.
You heard what he just said there? He said it's a staggering. He said it was not a slavery. That's why a lot of people don't know it as a slavery. It was a attempt annihilation. That's what that was. This is a full genocide of a people that was all dark skinned. Why? You're going to find out today.
While almost all the slaves shipped across the Atlantic were for agricultural work, most of the slaves destined for the Muslim Middle East were for sexual exploitation as concubines, in harems, and for military service. While many children were born to the slaves in the Americas, the millions of their descendants are citizens in Brazil and the United States of today. Very few descendants of the slaves that ended up in the Middle East survived. While most slaves who went to the Americas could marry and have families, most of the male slaves destined for the Middle East were castrated, and most of the children born to the women were killed at birth. It is estimated.
You understand what it's saying there? In the Middle East, they were killing them. They were even making where the men couldn't bring forth any more children. They were killing them when they brought more children. They were kill. It's kind of like what happened. And think about it. Who are they? Ishmael. Who's Ishmael? Right? Ishmael, the son of the Egyptian. Remember? Very important to understand. Nothing new under the sun. Throw Moses in the river Nile. Right? The same thing. They're known by their fruits. Watch when you see what you're going to see today, though.
That possibly as many as 11 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic, 95% of which went to South and Central America, mainly to Portuguese, Spanish, and French possessions. Only 5% of the slaves ended up in what we call the United States today. However, a minimum of 28 million.
You heard what I just said there? What did the scripture say? Let's look at the scripture real fast. We just have to. We got. Let's just look at.
Runs headlong into some sensitivities about what kind of food you can and with.
Let's look at. Let's go to Romans 11. Let's go to this. What does it say in Romans 11? It talks about a remnant. It talks about a remnant, right? It says that understand this. The people was as much as the sand of the sea, but only 10%. Only 10% got traveled. They were sent to the Americas. Understand this. You got to think about the triangular slave trade when you think of this, right? Very important to understand the slave trade, right? What had happened later on. See, they were pushed out, and then they were sent out. They went into every nation, every single one, South America, North America, every single one. We got to look at also what is called the triangular slave trade, right? What is the triangular slave trade? The triangular slave trade was basically a route that was commonly made because as they took the people from this area, look at how they're constantly targeting this main area. Sometimes there'll be like different areas; those are different subjects. But understand, right here would be the main area. You can see masses amount of them that would come out of this area for the sake of understanding, and they will constantly go. You can see they'll go here and here. It's like the reason why it was like a triangle slave trade because this is the area where that would take place. Let's see. Let me see if I got that picture on here to show you for the sake of understanding. Let's see. Right. Let's see right here. See this? This is what the triangular slave trade is. So this is what it would look like. It's kind of like they'll sweep down and they'll have some where they sweep up. So that's what the triangular slave trade represents. And understand, the scripture said what? They will go into captivity in every single nation. In fact, it said there would be not one nation they would not go. That's what it said. Not one nation they would not go. But let's hear the rest.
Enslaved in the Muslim Middle East. Since at least 80% of those captured by Muslim slave traders were calculated to have died before reaching the slave markets, it is believed that the death toll from 1400 years of Arab and Muslim slave raids into Africa could have been as high as 112 millions. When added to the number of those sold in the slave markets, the total number of African victims of the trans-Saharan and East African slave trade could be significantly higher than 140 million people. What is obscene about this whole subject is the Muhammadan Muslim and Arab culture of denial regarding their complicity.
What do they say? The culture of denial. Now, if you know about what happened to the Armenians, right? If you ever heard of the Armenian genocide, that was just not that long ago, about 100 years ago, a little more than that, about 1910, right? They had a time where they were killing, the Ottomans were murdering Christian, Armenian, all types of believers in that time in an area. They was completely annihilating them. And they deny it to this day, yet the evidence says it surely happened. This is something they also deny.
And the African slave trade, as well as the ignorance of black Muslims about the reality of their past and present conditions. The statistics and reports above are based upon the logbooks kept at the African slave ports, ship logs, travelers' reports, eyewitness accounts, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, the facts and reality of Muhammadan Islam's complicity in the slave trade and their inhuman depravity are infinitely more devastating, more staggering, and more incomprehensible than all the nightmare fictions in the world.
He's basically saying what is recorded, what is known in the records is more worse than all the nightmare fictions in the world. Now I want to show you something. What else happened around that time? There was did you know there was a written conversion? There was a conversion of the Ashkenazi. Understand, it's actually recorded. Let's actually see that conversion. So remember, this is the same time frame. The time that, understand, if you get rid of the people, when can we get the conversion? When the people are oppressed, right? Watch what happens here. Not even 100 years later. Watch what happens here.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dante Fortson here with episode number 5 of Go Ask Your Pastor.
I'm gonna skip a little ahead.
Document or a book, really.
Watch what it has here.
I guess a book is a document, technically. Anyway, comes from a book called The Conquest of a Continent, or The Expansion of the Races in America. This was published in...
Now, real fast, this is gonna be a lot of meat, but it's gonna be talking about this time frame. As you can see already in the title, is going to be for 1740 AD. Now, remember, when was this Islamic slave trade? About six early on, right? 600 AD, about that time, right? So for the sake of understanding, shalom, family, shalom, shalom. It's going to get deep today. Shalom, shalom. So let's understand. Amen. What was Islam? So you can see that it was very horrible. That's why we talk about these things, because we're not just going about these things without doing deep historical evidential research for the sake of understanding. But watch what it says here about this conversion. Remember, we had talked about this before, right? We wasn't being unbiased, right? We wanted to look at this very carefully. I'm going to go to a note here, and I'm going to show you what we had noted, right? Notes. 2 notes where we were noting information on these things, right? All right, so we'll look at these things real fast. Let's open up 2 notes. So I'm going to open up 2 notes. So one I constantly go over because it has some very important information in it. A note is just some truth, right? Just some history. It goes over some history, a little information about genetics, how they know who they are and whatnot. How we looked at the genetics. The genetics show that the Ashkenazi are actually European. But what you're going to see to truth, that's going to show you that this was recorded, right? So watch what you see today very carefully and understand that this is all going to be real documents.
1933. Now, the publisher, New York, London, Scribner's Sons, but right here, digitizing sponsor, University of Florida, and then you have the contributor, University of Florida.
So I'm gonna skip a little ahead, just bringing the information which can be double checked.
Hate black people so much that they just refuse to believe that God would ever choose black people. So let me go ahead and read from this. This is page 224 of Conquest of a Continent, the Expansions of the Races. I'm going to go down here. Actually, I'm going to start right here just to lead into this. Page 224, we're going to start near the top, and then we're going to read over to page 225. Excuse me. The most fertile recruiting ground for this type of humanity was in South Europe, Italy, and the Balkan countries, and the provinces of the Austrian Empire and Russia. Inducements were offered potential immigrants to come to America. There was no discrimination as to type or quality. Many criminals were rounded up, especially in southern Italy and Sicily. Oh, vocab alone, Sicilian. That's funny. Anyway, with the maybe he should go talk to them instead of telling people he's an expert in black stuff.
I'm gonna skip a little ahead.
The ratio
so he gets this
in the
one
United
part.
States during 1931 to 1932. Most of the criminals referred to were committed for serious offenses. The criminals from northwestern Europe were well under, sometimes only 1/4, their ratio to the general population. See, they were already messing with the crime statistics back then. Just so you know, for those that believe that all the crime statistics about black people are legit, they were importing European criminals too.
Yeah.
South,
so you can see what I'm gonna go a little further.
Has been checked, and that with the greatest difficulty. I'm over here right now for you. All
right, so watch this is what I want you to see here. So he just finished this part. It was just talking about the main thing right here was just this little part where it says, and it was this period that the Polish Jews began their invasion, right? Watch what happens here. Watch the detail once it talks about when this new people was to come in. Watch what happens here. Watch what it says here.
Are you watching? The great mass of immigrants from South Poland, Galatia, and Russia are Ashkenazim Jews, descendants in part of Alpine Khazars, or the Khazars, with a Mongol admixture, who entered the eastern Ukraine from Asia in the early centuries of our era. Many of the Khazars and their Khan were converted by Jewish missionaries, and they formally accepted Judaism in 740 AD. Let me go ahead and read that part again. Many of the Khazars and their Khan were converted by Jewish missionaries, and they formally accepted Judaism in 740 AD. It is doubtful whether there is a single drop of the old Palestinian Semitic speaking Hebrew blood among these Eastern, or let me back up. It is doubtful whether there is a single drop of the old Palestinian Semitic speaking Hebrew blood among these East European Jews.
Now understand this. You know what the book is saying? It's saying because they know that they converted, they know for a fact that they converted. So they say they are very doubtful that there will be any evidence. Now I'm gonna show you that this is a real book, right? This is a real book for the sake of understanding. You can find it yourself. This book has that information. This is the same thing that he's reading right here. You see, you can turn the pages. It actually can turn. You can see right there. And just for the sake of understanding, this is what we're looking at here, showing that information right there. It's talking about that time when they converted and said their blood, most likely they said their blood. And remember, this is before they did a confirmation in a DNA test, right? This is before they had a confirmation in a DNA test, so that when the DNA test was done, we 100% know, right? We 100% know by the DNA test. right? But today, we have those DNA tests. We have those tests, and those DNA tests are going to be very, very important for this confirmation. So this person is writing this, not that he has that DNA test, but he's writing that he believes that they wouldn't have any genetics that would be related to him, to Shem, for the sake of understanding. Today, we know, even by looking at scripture, the Ashkenazi are of Japheth. As we look at what the scripture says, the Ashkenazi would be related to who? Javan, right? But they are under Gomer, right? The Ashkenaz, right? But in genetics, they should be related to Javan, which is the Greeks. As we can see, is going to involve Kittim, which is commonly known as the Romans. Very important to understand. Looking at information, it is well known today. It is not debated, but well known today that the Ashkenazi are genetically Europeans, right? What genetics do you think the and the Romans would have? European genetics. So what else? What are we seeing? We're seeing a confirmation in genetic studies, also in writing. Understand this. It is written that they converted, and this person says, based on that conversion, he doesn't believe that it have any genetic DNA showing that they are blood-born Judeans. You hear what he just said there? I'll just go back a little bit just so you can hear that last phrase right there. That's very important to understand. That last phrase there is the most important thing.
Blood among these East Judaism in 740 AD.
So they converted. Remember what happened during that time. The Islamic slave trade. Who was all being persecuted? Every single person of dark skin. Why? Because they were Judeans. In fact, it's recorded that a Judean woman is the one who killed Muhammad. Understand? And he actually died in his way that he prophesied that if he's a false prophet, he would die in a certain way, which I'll let Dave Wood introduce that if you ever want some information for that. But let's watch what it says right here when it gives some information on here. Watch what happens here.
It's doubtful whether there's a single drop of the old Palestinian Semitic.
Now, why does it say Palestinian? Let's go back real fast. You know that it is genetically proven. Now, what's important to understand is that if the people who are called the Negroes, if they are also related with because remember, Ishmael has the same father? Has the same father from Abraham. So if they both have the same father, they should match genetically, right? Let's look at, I'm going to show you a report that I found that I want you to see here. I want you to see a report. This report right here, this is a real site. You can see right here. You can see it. I'm going to go to the site right here so you can see the evidence of the site. So you can see right here, Library of Congress. You can see right here, this is a newspaper. One of the brethren, shout out to our brother, Lewis, and our brother who is continuing with these things for the sake of understanding. Watch what it says right here. I want you to see this for the sake of understanding. And I want to say your name, but I don't know if I'm going to say it right. I'm thinking of like Henry, but I don't think that's how you say it because our brother is Hispanic. But that may be it. Who knows? But let's look at this. Let's look at this little saying right here. Watch what it says right here. Maybe Jeremiah will say it because he got a great way pronouncing names. But watch what it says here. I want you to see this. This is what I want you to see here. So this is a summary. I'm gonna read the summary to you. This is a summary. Basically, what this says here on this newspaper. The main thing about the summary is that it mentions that the Negroes, which are with the Judean DNA, they have the same DNA, right? The Negroes, the Juda DNA is the same as the Arabic, the natural Arabics, for the sake of understanding, the sons of Ishmael, right? DNA. That's what this is going to show you here. It shows you that they have the same genetic DNA, for the sake of understanding. But let's actually read it. Let's look here, right? Let's go a little down. Let's look at here. Say happy. This all that. I want to read just the meat to you. So, because I know it's after this little chapter, the first one, and it starts right here. That's just a yellow color. most of them, again, that's not been there in generations. Okay. What? Okay, here it is. Watch what it says right here. It's kind of hard to see, but I'll try my best to word it out. Right? It is probable that most of them that are mixed breeds, right? For the Jews of the Mediterranean states have not wholly maintained their racial purity. So it's talking about they haven't maintained their racial purity. It says just as basically some of these of this area, it says who have not some admixtures of Negro blood. See what it's saying there? But this is what it says right here. Just as the Algary, there, I don't say that right. I'm not great with some of the words. There is sacredly a native Arab. Just for the sake of clarity, it's talking about a native Arab, right? And it's saying that their blood is mixed. Is like a mixture of the Negro blood. It's basically saying that they're related. That their blood is there. These people are actually related, for the sake of understanding. And if you see a little more information on the Moors and a couple different things like that, you'll see the relation there. You'll see that it would be very, very important to understand that they would know that they'll be related, for the sake of understanding. But that's why, for the sake of understanding, this is going to be a clear explanation from one who is going to be doing it a little more. So these things can be found, but it has to be understood in a sequence. So let's just continue reading. Watch what it says right here.
Speaking Hebrew blood among these eastern, or let me back up. It is doubtful whether there is a single drop of the old Palestinian Semitic speaking Hebrew blood among these East European Jews. That's what all the science is coming out and saying now. I showed you guys that in some of the other studies and addressing the evidence, and we're going to talk about that more and more throughout the Gentile study. But it says that they are East European Jews or Eastern European Jews, and they doubt that there is a single drop of Palestinian Semitic Hebrew blood among them. They are essentially a non-European people. That's interesting too. The language they speak, Judish or Yiddish, is a corrupt German of the Franconian dialect mixed with the Slavic and Hebrew elements.
Just for the sake of understanding, obviously a lot of people who don't believe in the Bible don't believe the three lines, right? Some people, if you don't look like blonde hair, blue eyes, they don't think you're European, right? We know there's a lot of Europeans with black hair. There's a lot of Europeans that don't look like European, for the sake of understanding, but they're European, for the sake of understanding. But that's going to be important to understand when you're speaking of details, right? The line of Japheth is what you're looking at, right? European, that name European came from the term Europa, which is from the Greeks, which the Greeks are of the Javan line, for the sake of understanding. So sometimes you got to come back to root, right? We're not going to see the term European in the scriptures because that is much later, which if we trace the origin, then we can find what all is linked to what. So we know who Ashkenazi is.
Fact strengthens the tradition of a large migration of German Jews into Poland in the Middle Ages. It may be that the strain of these German Jews has died out, leaving only their language behind, but in any event, the Polish Jews are now distinctly Alpine, a mixture of Slavs and of Asiatic invaders of Russia. So let me read through that one more time. I just want to read that again because the people who say that we have no evidence to support our claim, they say that we're anti-Semitic because we claim that these people are lying about their history. If they're not Semitic, then we're not anti-Semitic. And if we are Semitic, then those going against us are actually the ones that are anti-Semitic. But a lot of people don't believe in spiritual warfare. They believe up is up and down is down. They don't believe the first shall be last. They don't believe in God working in irony or using the foolish things to confound the wise. Why would God choose the people who are at the lowest part of the totem pole right now, economically and otherwise? Why would God choose them? God always chooses the underdog. Read your book. Read the book. One more time. The great mass, I'm going to start page 225. The great mass of immigrants from South Poland, Galatia, and Russia were Ashkenazim Jews. descendants in part of Alpine Khazars with a Mongol admixture who entered the western Ukraine from Asia in the early centuries of our era. Many of the Khazars and their Khan were converted by Jewish missionaries, and they formally accepted Judaism in 740 AD.
Okay, so real fast, just for the sake of understanding, this is also backed by GPS studies. So on this page, I want to show you that this is also backed up by GPS studies. So they know where they came from. We even have the location of where they came from, right? Watch what happens here.
The question we've been trying to answer is a question that has been on debate for the past couple of decades, mainly between linguists. That question is the origin of Yiddish language. Now, Yiddish is a language that consists of German, Hebrew, and Slavic elements written with Aramaic letter, and it has been spoken since the 9th century. The prevailing view is that Yiddish is an old German dialect, where the alternative view is that Yiddish is a Slavic language that used to have Slavic words and grammar, but over time it shaped its Slavic lexicon and adopted German words, while retaining the Slavic grammar. In a sense, Yiddish speakers sounds like Yoda from the Star Wars universe. Yoda's language also consists of words in English, real and made-up one, like Wookiee and Jedi, but the grammar is off. Yiddish also consists of 251 words for just buy and sell, suggesting it was invented by traders. Language, geography, and genetics are all connected. The further I move away from England, the more dissimilar the DNA and languages of the people that I will encounter will become. So if we have a tool that converts genetics into geography or languages, we can find our answer. Fortunately, in 2014, we published the Geographic Population Structure, or GPS tool, that does exactly that. GPS converts DNA information into geography. So to answer the hypothesis of where Yiddish speakers came from, we apply GPS to the genome of Yiddish speakers to find where their DNA is from. Surprisingly, GPS took us to northeastern Turkey. At first, we did not understand the results, but when we looked at some old books, we found 4 ancient villages named Ishkenaz, Eskenaz, Ashenaz, and Ashkuz, names that may be derived from the word Ashkenaz. This place resides on a hub of trade networks. This is where Silk Road...
So very important to understand. They have a location. They're called Ashkenaz by themselves, called themselves Ashkenaz. Their locations are found out about Ashkenaz. There's plays on words in the Bibles about these things. Maybe one day I'll go over a separate note about bashan, a play on the word bashan that the Lord has in the Bible hidden for latter days for the sake of understanding, and the play on the word bashan connecting with that Ashkenazi origin, where it connects them with Gog and everything. I'll talk about that another day for the sake of understanding. But you can see that the genetics, the location, and the information is actually connected in unison. That's what when you find truth unites in unison. The word is showing it, right? Showing you all these things, that everything that you're seeing here is 100% truth. But let's hear the end of this.
It's doubtful whether there's a single drop of the old Palestinian Semitic-speaking Hebrew blood among these East European Jews. They are essentially a non-European people. The language they speak, Judish or Yiddish, is a corrupt German of the Franconian dialect mixed with the Slavic and Hebrew elements, which fact strengthens the tradition of a large migration of German Jews into Poland in the Middle Ages. It may be that the strain of these German Jews has died out, leaving only their language behind, but in any event, the Polish Jews are now distinctly Alpine, a mixture of Slavs and Asiatic invaders of Russia.
Hear that?
So, I want you to take that piece of evidence, go ask your pastor why they're not teaching it. If your pastor is unaware of this evidence, that is fine. Help them get educated. If your pastor is aware of this evidence and has not told you, or they have no desire to teach this evidence or even look into it, you need to find a new pastor. Simple as that. Because it's time we start holding all these pastors accountable for the history and making them answer the questions that we ask.
So now let's go back. So we got that through. Now, what we need to do, now that we got the Ashkenazi thing solved, what do you know about the Ashkenazi? They're not the Judean. And is it anti-Semitic to say that? No, it's not anti-Semitic, it's the truth. It's 100% the truth. It is proven without a fact. Understand that. It's proven without a doubt for the sake of understanding. And when something is proven that solitary, right, that completely still, it cannot be thrown away because you got DNA studies, you got GPS studies, you got scripture studies, and you got even written documents. Do you think that there will be any written documents? Because remember, what is the Jews? What did they look like? What would they have looked like? Just for the sake of understanding, in ancient times, right? If we look at right here, they would look a little darker skinned for the sake of understanding. And there's other scriptures that talk about the color of their hair being black and different things like that. Those things are actually very important. Let's just understand that the world today had a big falling away, right? But let's get that full understanding. Is there any information? Remember, what time frame are we touching on right now? Maybe I'll make a timeline and show what these things are. So we just talked about when they kicked out of Rome, they went up to Portuguese for the sake of understanding. There's a great video. If you ever get a chance to see some of this stuff, there's a great video that one of the brothers have made that illustrates how the people went into Portugal. Maybe I'll go to that, but it's going to have all the information on here too. So we're going to look at that on what is actually the information concerning these people. So watch this as we go over this.
On BNF, or Gallica.bnf.fr. This is from France.
But before I proceed, let's make sure, see if you have any questions. Shalom, shalom, family. Shalom, shalom. Amen, amen. See how everyone's doing. Amen, family. If I'm not mistaken, the first church built. Yup, that's right. And yes, it had, yup. In fact, there is evidence that someone that was a slave that was recorded to be able to write in the same Hebrew, not just regular block Hebrew, but the same Hebrew that was written during the time of Moses' age. And he was blind and he was deaf, and he was able to write in those things, which that's also an interesting one too. Maybe we'll go over that one too. These cats, they are not real Israel. Yup, that's right. Because worry about persecution. Yup. That's right. Amen. Amen. Messiah is our master. Amen. Amen. That's right. You say it in the name of no matter. Amen. That's right. So now let's see this.
I'll give you guys a link. This is from Bulletin Society. I'm not going to try to pronounce all this. Geographic. And again, this is from 1890. Now, Nefertiti said that no evidence existed. She said we're making this history up. So now we still haven't tied it to us, though. We've just shown that, yes, there is a place in West Africa named after Judah. It is said that the Jew or tribe lived there. One of the tribes of Israel was there. So now let's see if we can find any consistency in this. So now the Jews of Spain and Portugal and the Inquisition. This is published in 1877 by Princeton Theological Seminary. So when you hear these urban apologists saying they debunk the Israelite sources, ask them to show you the video or documentation of them debunking this source from Princeton Theological Seminary. Ask them to show you the source or the video of them debunking the map from Yale. Ask them to show you these things because they keep making these claims. So anyway, the Jews of Spain and Portugal, we're on page 68 of 148. The link will be in the description for you to read yourself. You can see it's not a screenshot. This is the whole book. If I do this, the page will turn. All right. Thus was Spain deprived of her large Jewish population. The synagogues were purified and used as Christian churches. The vast sums of money which were owed to the Jews and the still larger amounts which they were forced to leave behind them found their way partly into the hands of their debtors or still more into those of the sovereign. The chief professors of medicine were sent out of the country to the terrible inconvenience of the population and trade to the terrible inconvenience of the population, and trade and industry languished till they almost died out. Unfortunately, at the time of the expulsion, the plague was raging in Castile, and the fugitives brought with them the disease, propagating it wherever they went, and not unnaturally causing their advent to be viewed with loathing and horror. This circumstance induced King John to hasten their departure from Portugal, for which purpose ships were duly provided according to the agreement. But such was the temper of the captains and sailors that they subjected the Jews to the possible conditions.
Now understand this. Before I proceed, what is they talking about here? It's important to understand this. I probably got to pull up a map because if I don't illustrate this, this might be quickly missed. Let's pull up a map. Let's just go to a regular map and let's look at a map. Let's just pull up a random map. All right, so watch what happens here. I just want to show you something. So where are they? What is we talking about here, right? It's talking about people are up here, right? They're over here, right? They're being sent down, right? What's happening now is that's sent down, and they're going to be sent into these parts of Africa for the sake of understanding. They're up here. These are actually recorded. It's a lot of documentaries. That's why you see a lot of people say, oh, the Jews were up here. Yes, absolutely. They were up here. The darker skinned Jews were up here. But by knowing who they were forced down. They were forced down and is recorded in many documents. That's why, remember we had talked about the bottleneck that they said because there were millions and millions, many of them. But yet the Ashkenazi records show that there was only a small portion of Ashkenazi right here, right? And then they was moving around for the sake of understanding. As we could see like the Khazars and different areas like that because they were actually for around these areas. But what you're going to see today is that the Judeans that were up here were going to be forced downward. So that's what he's reading here. So watch what happens here. It's very important to what he says here. So remember, this is still early on.
Plundered them of their goods and valuables, even to their very clothes, and landed them naked and bare of everything on barren points of the African coast, leaving them to die of starvation or to be sold into slavery to the Moors.
See, we also seen that when we just seen what it said about the Muslim. It said they had nothing. They basically stripped them. They took them of all their stuff. It basically was like bare naked for the sake of it. That's why they were saying, oh, they're like animals because they were basically didn't have anything. That's why you see a lot of times they reference them as being just wild men. Why would there still be wild men in the 13 and 1400s? Understand this. Why would there be a mass group of people in Africa, for the sake of understanding, that were sold? Understand, if you look at some of the things that some of the slaves were doing before they were even taught, they were able to do many things. That's why they were so valuable, because they had skills in all types of trades. That's why when they were buying them and just showing them what to do, they already had all types of skills. Understand this. But let's first understand this.
Nor was this all. The king wrested from their parents all children from between the ages of 3 and 10 of those Jewish immigrants who from poverty or otherwise had omitted to pay the capitation tax on entering, or who were forced to remain in Portugal, and had them transported to the newly discovered islands of St. Thomas, which is the same as Sao Tome, which then swarmed with alligators and other beasts of prey to be brought up as Christians. So he's telling you, the Jews were deported out of Portugal because they didn't pay the tax, and they had their children stripped away and sent to this island where there were alligators and other beasts of prey. So now, Nefertiti wants us to believe that these were Europeans stripped butt naked on the western coast of Africa and left there. This is what she said. She said there was no history, right? So we still haven't proven whether they're black or white Jews. We just know that there are Jews there after Nefertiti and Damon Richardson lied. I think it's important to keep bringing that point up because nobody has called them out. And again, Eric Mason said white people didn't have anything to do with the writing of the Bible, which means Eric Mason believes that the Israelites that wrote the Bible are black, and Nefertiti is telling us they're white. So now, somebody got to be wrong. Somebody got to be right. So let's keep going. This is another source from Princeton Theological Seminary, published 1882, The Earth and Its Inhabitants. Right here. Page 320 of 628. The link will be in the description. East of Great Popo begins the Dahomey territory, guarded by the important town of Glewe, known to Europeans by the various names of Fida, Hasida, Wida, or Wida, W-I-D-A. I told you to remember that because of the map. W-I-D-A, W-I-D-A, same place. It's important to establish this so the urban apologists can't wiggle their way out of anything. Same place. So let me get back. The old writers called it Juda. So now we know why the 1747 Emmanuel Bowen map says Juda. Now we know why this one says Wida. It says, and its inhabitants were said to be Jews. while the neighboring river Alala, whose real name is Ephra, became the Euphrates. Didn't we just read that in the French source?
Mm-hmm.
That they were believed to be a tribe of Israel. So now we have two different sources here. Two different sources.
That's right.
Let me see here. All right. So now I was gonna so anyway, this was published 1882. Two different sources. The other one was published 1890. So this one predates that source by 8 years. 8 years. So we have two sources saying that these are definitely Judah. And it says, during the flourishing days of the slave trade from 16 to 18,000 were annually transported from a Judah, as the Portuguese called this place, which at the time had a population of 35,000. The titular deity of Juda is the snake, and the famous fetish temple is served by priestesses called mothers or sisters of serpents and recruited by the abduction of young girls on feast days.
So you see what it's saying here? Now, for some reason, Israel was falling away as usual. This is probably why it was just constantly going to captivity, because they're falling away. They were worshiping snakes, for sake of understanding. In fact, that's actually recorded. Here's basically a little bit of that read. Let's go down real fast and let's look at this. Right. So this is also something right here. I'm gonna click this. This is what it's reading here. Right. Down Marie. Watch what it says here. Right. Talks about that place that's called Judah. Right. Talks about how they came from geese. Right. But notice what it says here. It says that they was basically worshiping those snakes, right? Basically saying that they was worshiping those snakes, for the sake of understanding. That's what it's saying there. But it's saying that these are going to be indeed the Judeans, right? So they were turning. They was turning. After they're going to see that, they're going to turn back to her. But let's see.
Some of them will tell you that it couldn't have been Israel because they worshipped a snake, and I would encourage you to go look up Nehushtan in the Bible. It was the brass serpent that Moses made that they began to worship. So snake worship isn't outside of Israel's history. But understand here, the Portuguese were calling them this. Why were the Portuguese called this? Because the Portuguese were the ones deporting Jews to West Africa. So, of course, they called it Judah. So now, we still haven't established anything specific as to whether they were black or European. So let's continue. This book right here, brown.edu. So when the urban apologists come and say they debunked our sources, make sure you get the receipts that they debunked this document from brown.edu. Portuguese exploration to the west and the formation of Brazil, 1450 to 1800. So I went ahead and went down to page 17, brown.edu. You want to go down to page 17. You want to go to point 14 right here. Now, remember, Nefertiti said these are Europeans that got dropped off. Now, listen to what happened to these people, and you tell me if you believe the European children did this. Just tell me if you think this makes sense, happening off the west coast of Africa, where we just read that there were alligators and other beasts of prey. It says, by the year 1470, the Portuguese had found the equatorial island of Sao Tome. That's the same as St. Thomas, in the Ghanaian Gulf off the African coast. The climate.
So also remember, this is still before the transatlantic slave trade. Understand that. That's still early on, right?
To be extremely unwholesome for Europeans. Extremely unwholesome for Europeans.
So it's talking about the climate where these Judeans were dropped off. It said that the climate proven to be extremely unwholesome. That's for the sake of understanding, because we know like the sun and all those things is not good. You got to have sunscreen if you don't have pigment in that area, especially not having any clothes, because the Judeans, they were dropped off there and they didn't have any clothes. They stripped them of everything. It would not be a good area for Europeans. It's recorded that the Judeans were put here in this area that is, as we've seen on that map, called the area that's called Kingdom of Judah.
Settlement was slow. The official chronicler of King Zhao II, that's King John, Garcia de Rezende, reports on one of the methods to populate this island that also throws some light on a tragic form of Jewish participation in the Portuguese Atlantic Empire. The king had allowed Jewish refugees from Spain, from where they had been expelled in 1492. Notice the consistency.
Real fast, you see the connection there? Now, where were the Judeans? In Portuguese. That's up there in Spain, right? That's when you remember Spain, Spaniards. You might get some Latin Judeans, right? That's where you're going to start to get that mixture. You're going to see some lighter skinned Judeans. Maybe they were more bound with each other, kind of like what you see when you think about a lot of the Hispanic, how they got that tradition. They constantly bound to each other because that was a common thing for Israel. Could they have lost their tradition? Absolutely. They could have lost their tradition and picked up another one. Where would the Spanish tradition come from, for the sake of understanding? Right? Understand that a lot of these things, a lot of the traditions, you got to trace them back to their source. Then they're going to open some doors for understanding. But let's proceed.
He said
So just understand that, like you see how some of them with worshiping snakes, be careful. Religion doesn't always tell us their actual origin of race. So just always remember that.
We misinterpret history. To remain in Portugal only in return for payment of an enormous ransom. In 1493, those who could not pay had their children taken away from them, baptized by force, and deported to Sao Tome in order to be raised as Christians and to help populate the island that the king had just leased to Alvaro de Camina at the annual rent of 100,000 reis. Nothing is known of their further fate, although later chroniclers attribute the thriving sugar production on the island to the talents of those deported children and their offspring.
So I'm just gonna skip. Obviously, them having that pigment, they was able to stand up a little bit in that type of condition. That's why he was just making that point there. But he's gonna give a little more detail on some other things.
So once again, exploration to the west and the formation of Brazil, 1450 to 1800, brown.edu. So now over here, the Hibernian Magazine, or the Compendium of Entertaining Knowledge. When was this published? We're going to see. 1784, the New York Public Library. It was digitized in 2007. So this is from the New York Public Library, 1784. And let's see. All right, here we go. But now, this is difficult to read because their S's look like F's and everything else. So I'm going to read this the best I can. All right. So we're going to start from, let me go up a little bit. All right. The discovery of the Gold Coast served, indeed, yet more to enlarge the sphere of the navigation of the Portuguese than their slave trade, but it forced them also to extend themselves on the coast and to settle colonies in Congo, Angola, and other places which they had till then neglected. Prince Henry's colonies were enlarged by his successors. King John II, in 1492, expelled all Jews to the island of St. Thomas, Sao Tome, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Leongo, who are despised even by the very Negroes, are descended.
So very important to understand, very, 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 very important to understand. In this time frame, it's important to understand that they're calling these Judeans black, right? They're calling them darker skin. You're gonna get clear for the clarity there that he's also referring them as Negroes. It's very important to understand that these Judeans are, as it says, they were forced into Africa, for the sake of understanding. This is actually recorded in history in multiple accounts.
Colonist St. Thomas soon became a considerable place of trade and valuable for its sugar plantations. Valuable for its sugar plantations. Isn't that what we just read? That these Jews that were dropped off here, these Portuguese, these people that were deported by the Portuguese, they had a thriving sugar production. It says the climate proved extremely unwholesome for Europeans. The other document said they were stripped naked and left with alligators and other beasts of prey. This one right here is the first time that I'm showing you that we see that they are black. It says that they are black Jews. Again, published in 1784. These are black Jews. Now, they will try to say we're reading this out of context and black might not mean black. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's look at another source. Yeah, I'd actually, like I said, this is my third time, I think, recording this. So, yeah, it was open a couple times. So now let's go to 1851, a treatise on physical geography, comprising hydrology, geognosy, geology, meteorology, botany, zoology, and anthropology. Now, Nefertiti said this evidence didn't exist, but I'm showing you guys piece by piece. We know that there was a place called Juda on the west coast of Africa. We know that they called it that because one of the tribes were believed to be there. And now we see that they are called Portuguese. The Portuguese Jews were called Black Jews. So now, we'll come down to here. We need go no further. This is, let me give you this right here. Again, a treatise on physical geography, published 1851. See what other information we can find. And Northwestern University. This is where they got the original from. Northwestern University, 1851. So now, when these urban apologists keep telling you that they debunked all this stuff, make them show you the receipts. Make them show you a video or a peer-reviewed paper showing they debunked this document from Northwestern University. So right here, we need go no further than the Jews of southern Spain. Remember, the Jews from Spain went into Portugal, and compare them with those of Holland and northern Germany to perceive a very striking difference. The Spanish Jew is always dark complexion, and his hair is uniformly black, whilst the German Jew is often as fair as any German and has light or red hair with blue eyes. The various shades of color observable among the Negro or African race tends to the same conclusion. Along the coast of Guinea, which is low, marshy and hot, we find jet black complexions, and this is the very country from which American Negroes have been derived. Again, the various shades of color observable among the Negroes or African race tends to the same conclusion. Along the coast of Guinea, which is low, marshy, and hot, we find jet black complexions, and this is the very country from which the American Negroes have derived. They're talking about the western coast of Africa where they put those black Jews.
So real fast, I just want to show you something, because this statement is really interesting, because there is a someone who's like a historian, is Leonardo. He's supposed to be a Jewish, right? Supposed to be a Jewish person. He actually comments. He makes a comment. I want you to see his comment here. Really interesting. Basically says he talks about this book that was going on in 1910 that was going around. It was like the Jew, a Negro. There was a book that was talking about that the Jew was a Negro, for the sake of understanding. And it was a common thing. So he had said a statement. I want you to see that statement. This is what he says here. He knows that that during that time, which we know, many people were accepting that the Jews were white, right? We know they're not white, but they were accepting it. People were accepting. But what he says, but their precinct's racial place was not fixed. It said it was not fixed. It was not in foundation. It says, a long tradition of European folklore reinforced by an emerging racial science. See the saying there? Even the science was rising up. Even with that science, cast the Jews on the black side of the color line. Hear what he just said there? This is a Judean who's writing this, that's seeing all the things that's going on, and he mentions that by the science and by the folklore of the European, right? The information that was going on, they said that the Jew was on the darker side of the color line. Let's continue.
Nefertiti says we're taking this out of context and we're making up a history that doesn't exist. And yet I'm showing you piece by piece how all this is coming together. So let me take a second. I'm going to pause this. I'm going to cut this right here so I don't go over the limit. And I'm going to start it up again.
All right, 1 second. Let me actually, for the sake of understanding, because sometimes for the sake of the live, going over things like this, it's important to show the source. I think it's important to have the source. So this quote right here is a real quote. You can see, and this also is the source right here, as all the sources are always cited. It's all good to cite your sources. Don't grab anything random. Make sure you back check everything just to make sure everything is true. So you can see, talks about the source and what he's actually quoting from. The source that this person is quoting from, this is actual the paper right here, and this source, you can see He's actually quoting from, to go down and show you what he's actually quoting from. This is what he's quoting from right here. So obviously it's like a person reviewing something of something that was written, right? So you can see this one is what he's quoting from, right? Just to show that some of these things are going to be things that can be back checked for the sake of understanding. So these things can be back checked. So he pointed out that yes, he said yes, that was something that many accepted. Many actually, with the evidence was actually pointing a different direction. But let's proceed.
All right, so now that we see that the Spanish Jews are always dark complexion, what's probably going to happen is they're going to say, well, see, it says dark, and it doesn't really mean black, and it doesn't necessarily mean black because they have that document, the one that she lied about and said I tried to hide, the one from Tel Aviv University, where the skip a little bit. European guy goes on a long rant about black doesn't really mean black, and swarthy doesn't really mean black. So anytime we see black in reference to Jews in history, it could actually mean white. Yeah, that nonsense. This is the nonsense they want you to believe. Confusion. They want you to be in confusion. But anyway, we're going to continue here. Now, this is from Hannah Adams. Now, that was the picture I had up when we first started, and I said we'd come back to it. So let me pull up Hannah Adams again. Hannah Adams is this lady right here. This lady right here. So now, we're going to talk about Hannah Adams because they claim that we're making this history up. So now we know the Portuguese Jews are black. We verified that in 2 sources. There's going to be more. There's going to be more to come. We know that the Portuguese Jews are connected to West Africa. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. So now she has her book. I'm going to read this in 2 parts. So her book, you read the regular page and it continues just like a regular book. But then in the notes section, when you read it, it continues over to the next page, almost like a tiny book within her book. So first I'm going to read the main part, and then I'm going to come back and read the notes. So right here, the Spanish and Portuguese Jews claim their descent from the tribe of Juda. So now all this stuff is connected. So the people on the west coast of Africa call Juda or a Judah or Wida or Wida are connected. They were believed to be Jews. We've seen that from a French source and a non-French source. I believe it was an English source. We see that. We see that they are black. We see that they were deported from Portugal because they fled from Spain. Now, the Spanish and Portuguese Jews claim their descent from the tribe of Judah. Now we're getting down to specific tribes. We're getting down to a specific tribe here.
Also, you can see that they say, when they talk about that many of their ancestors were moved, you can see right there, because that's what happened there. When we talk about the history, they were being destroyed and persecuted. Oh, it's doing that thing. All right. So we're back. Let's continue on.
I believe it was an English source. We see that. We see that they are black. We see that they were deported from Portugal because they fled from Spain. Now, the Spanish and Portuguese Jews claim their descent from the tribe of Judah. Now we're getting down to specific tribes. We're getting down to a specific tribe here. And found these pretensions on a supposition which prevails among them that many of their ancestors removed or were sent into Spain at the time of the Babylonian captivity. In consequence of this supposed superiority, they till very lately would not by intermarriage or otherwise incorporate with their brethren of other nations. They had separate synagogues, and if a Portuguese Jew, even in England or Holland, married a German Jewess, he was immediately expelled from the synagogue, deprived of every civil and ecclesiastical right, and ejected from the body of the nation. A late instance has occurred of a Jew in Berlin, this is Germany, who, having married the daughter of a Portuguese physician, the parents of the girl went into mourning as for the death of a relation. The manner of the Portuguese Jews differ from the rest of the nation and are more polished. They have nothing peculiar in their dress. The opulent among them vie with the other nations of Europe in refinement, elegance, and show, and they differ from them in worship only. In Portugal, the name of a Jew is a term of such high reproach that the government found it necessary to enact a law which forbade any person to call another by that appellation.
Just for the sake of understanding, he's talking about how even just to call someone a Jew, even just to call someone of Judah, it was something that not a lot of people wanted to be called. But watch what he says here.
If a man who is styled a Jew to his face stabs the offender, the law does not condemn him, and trifling as this regulation may appear, it has produced beneficial effects. So now, the name Jew was outlawed to the point that if you called someone a Jew, they could stab you and not be held guilty. Let me take a sip of water real quick. So now we see that they remained separate. So now let's talk about this idea that they mixed with everybody and nobody's pure race. So let's do the math here. Millions of Israelites are kidnapped off of the west coast of Africa. Now this text says they stayed separate. They didn't mix, and if they did mix, they were kicked out of the community. They were brought over to Africa. Yes, some of the women were raped. They were the children were raised in the house, but we also know that there were breeding farms where they were breeding black people and breeding more and more black people with black people. The black men, remember, an Israelite traced through the father. The modern nation of Israel had to start tracing through the mother. Why is that?
Why is he saying that? Why is he saying that the modern race of Israel is tracing through their mother? It's very important to understand that it's well known that the people who call themselves Israel today are extremely excited to have a study that shows that they're European. But they got overly excited and thought the study actually showed that they were Israelites. But rather the study was showing that they were European. Now, what the study is and what it looks at, because it's actually pointing to the women, which, why would you go to the women if you want to find out the father? Because if you find out the father, then it's going to be, as it says, 100% genetically European. But through the women, that's where you get the distinguishing of some things for the sake of understanding. But let's go to that one. Let's go to that information, because I want you to see that right here. Let's actually look at that real fast. So sometimes we go to this one and we talk about a little study that they had, a real study that they had on the DNA. So everything's sourced, everything got sites and everything. As you can see, we got the actual study here from that college. So it talks about they had 4 founding mothers, right, who lived in Europe 1,000 years ago. It points that in that time, and even you can see where it says 2/5 of all Ashkenazi had this origin, for the sake of understanding. And for the sake of understanding, is a more wider study. There's a more wider study that actually brings them all to one major group, right? So this is what it's talking about. He's talking about just a little bit of that study. Let's go and let's hear the rest.
They are not the people of the book. The book tells you that they were the father. So now you have black male Israelites over here in America. They weren't allowed to reproduce with white women. But they, again, they had breeding farms where you kept producing more and more Israelite offspring. So this myth that we're all mixed up because the plantation owners were just raping everybody, that's not true. Because a lot of the children of the rape lived in the house, and then they would rape their daughters a lot of times and have children by them. They weren't just throwing the children back out to mix back in with the general population of Israelites out there. Understand, it's important to understand this because a lot of people like to just throw blanket statements out there and say, well, we're all mixed up because everybody was being raped through slavery, and that's not how it happened. It's just not how it happened. A lot of those guys, yes, they were rapists, but it wasn't enough to get rid of pure Israelites because the father is the one through which it is traced. So if a European man raped an Israelite woman, that child would be considered European. Not by the Europeans, but by biblical standards. They would not be considered Israelite. They would be considered Gentile. And there's a distinction in there if you go through the Old Testament. Matter of fact, there's an encounter in the Old Testament where the son of an Israelitish woman gets into it with an Israelite kid, and it specifically points out the son of an Israelitish woman, the father was an Egyptian. It makes sure to point out that the father was Egyptian. If they considered him Israelite, they wouldn't have to point out that he's the son of an Israelitish woman and an Egyptian man.
He's just summarizing that part, what happened when that one person was going against that other person, and one obviously being a real Israelite had a father who was an Israelite, and one being actually considered a Egyptian because their father was Egyptian, though their mother was a Jew, was an Israelite. So just for the sake of understanding, as we're talking about.
That's nuances to pay attention to. So anyway, it says their
marriage was the different. DNA, just for clarity, the DNA has to be traced through the father. It doesn't matter. That's why this information, this was ridiculous, right? Why would they celebrate over something like that, where it says they're related by the 4 mothers, right? That was ridiculous. But there is a bigger study that found out the group is related to Europeans, as we had traced. They were traced with some of the male lines, and then find out that's what you see on that one what I had went on that shows you a little bit of these things. So you can see right here, that's why even that information, that prehistoric information that you've seen where it linked them even with the Khazars, which they deny, many of them deny, but remember, not all of them were Khazars. Some of them were Khazars, yes. Some of them were Khazars, but some of them are Ashkenazi. Right? There's little different groups for the sake of understanding. Some of them were Khazar, some were Ashkenazi, but as you can see, there would be like a few of these different groups that genetically are the same, right? So here's a little of that larger study. So right here, they basically show that they lived about in that area 600 to 800 years ago. According to the analysis, they were close to each other about 350 people for the sake of understanding. But that's why we got that GPS study and that map and everything, and it just shows you all these things are sure, that they know for sure that they are actually the European for the sake of understanding. And that's why I have a link from, like I was saying, from their site. This is from their site where they had showed that they seen that study and they verify that those 4 women was something to be excited over. They tried to add on that they were right here, like from Shem, but that's not in the report. The report does not say that they're from Shem. The report actually says 100% word for word that they are European. That's actually what the report actually brings in. Now, the reason why that's important is because truth. The truth is what matters. The truth, right? We can't keep going on and supporting this lie, especially with this amount of information. We can't keep going on and supporting this lie. But let's proceed.
And the term Jew was basically outlawed. So what did they call us? Negroes. We'll come to that. We already see one point they were black. They're called black. Now we see that the term Jew is outlawed. We'll keep going. Hannah Adams has some interesting things here. So now Dr. Buchanan. Dr. Buchanan is going to come up again. We're going to talk about Dr. Buchanan in just a second. Matter of fact, we're going to go over this in the notes real quick, and then we'll come back to Dr. Buchanan. She quotes Dr. Buchanan several times. See Buchanan's research in Asia, and then Buchanan's research in Asia, the memoir Expediency and Excellency Establishment been in British India. But anyway,
Before I proceed, see how everyone's doing. Shalom, family. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that one too. Yep, yep, yep. And when we think about the word Negro, which means black, we can think of like when we said Simon called Niger, right? Going from that, talking about calling them black, right? Simon called black, which, let's proceed.
Right here, Dr. Buchanan observes that the black Jews communicated to him much interesting intelligence concerning their brethren, the ancient Israelites in the East.
You hear what I just said? This writes down that the ancient Israelites were called the black Jews.
For you one more time, Hannah Adams says this. Dr. Buchanan observes that the black Jews communicated to him much interesting intelligence concerning their brethren, the ancient Israelites in the East. Traditional indeed in its nature, but in general, illustrative of true history. Illustrative of true history. And he goes on to talk about their communication throughout multiple countries. But who did he talk about? The black Jews. And again, they'll probably pull up that document for Tel Aviv saying it doesn't necessarily mean they're black because it says they're black. Ridiculousness. So now, right here, this is the Jews of Cochin. We talked about the Jews of Cochin in another video, again, in the Go Ask Your Pastor. But the Jews of Malabar were black Jews. And you can read that in Dr. Buchanan's. You can read that in this too. I'm going to leave this link here and then Dr. Buchanan's link. You can read about the black Jews of Cochin. But now, right here, it says, the Jews of Cochin, says our author, loaded him with civilities and gave him a number of entertainments, though the climate had rendered them so swarthy that they were almost mulattoes. They would have considered themselves dishonored if they had eaten, drank, or prayed with the black or Negro Jews of Malabar. So now, when you get into this stuff, he's going to talk about the white Jews and the black Jews. Now, the white Jews came from somewhere else. They tell a story. They tell a story, and then the black Jew story is shared, and the person that they go back to, or the people they go back to, is the black Jews to find out the information, because they believe the black Jews, because as Hannah pointed out, it's historical. So anyway, it says play with the Negro or black Jews or Malabar, because the last were descended from the slaves in the service of the Jews of Cranganore, who were afterwards emancipated. So you'll want to go down there and see that history where the white Jews enslaved the black Jews. It's kind of interesting.
You heard what I just said there? That's actually historical. Very important to understand that it is recorded. It is very, very known, very well known, that the Ashkenazi were actually the ones that had influenced the slave trade. They're also changing the information. You see that they own media. Think about that. They own the easiest thing to try to take care of you, right? The things that try to change your mind, right? Media. Power over media, over information is great power. Yet you're seeing that documentation can't be changed. But new information can be changed, right? New information can be changed, but documentation cannot be changed. Very important to understand that. But like we say, like what he was just saying there, from that area, the kingdom of Judah, this is the area where they got most of those slaves from, right here. This is actually where we're going to see all them crammed into the ships. And who is actually the one who is leading them? It is known, right? The ones who are Jewish were the ones that were, as it says, at the height of the American slavery, 78% of slave owners were those Jewish, for the sake of understanding. 40% even owned them. So what he's showing you here is that what you're seeing here is real information, right? It's real information that you're seeing here. But let me close this one. And this one, I'll close this one. Let's proceed.
Interesting history. This is not the part I want to read. Let me go back to here. So now,
that's right.
Come back to here.
Exactly.
This is the notes section of what page is this? 367. 367, 368. So when you go to the link, page 367, 368. This note right here. It is said that in about 1755, when a terrible earthquake in Lisbon destroyed 30,000 of the inhabitants, the Portuguese believed that the mercy of God might be obtained by burning some Jews and other heretics in what they call auto de fe, or act of faith. Now, this is interesting because this is still coming out of the Inquisition in Spain. And what were they doing in the Inquisition? They were basically lynching people, burning people, tying them to crosses and burning them, lynchings.
So this, just gonna type it down. Make sure I'm spelling that right. Exactly how I spell it. Yeah, I had a feeling it was like that. Auto de fe. Du fe. I'm gonna show you. So, to get a little information on this, you can obviously, like the information here, you can type it down, you can find it. It is true. These things are actually recorded of old for the sake of understanding, but he's just going over just some solid information.
And the Knights Templar was behind a lot of this stuff. So when you get to America, you have the KKK lynching who are Israelites, tying them to trees, burning them. This was a continuation of the Inquisition, what was happening to black people in America. They don't want to tell you that, though. They don't want to tell you it's a continuation of the Inquisition because and this is why some of the Israelites that were turned into slaves here in America tried to convert to Christianity, because they thought that Christians would be freed. Like in Portugal, they tried to force them to become Christians. The history is the same. They just keep repeating history. Now, if we keep reading, it says, it appears that the Jews have no accurate deduction of their descent or genealogy. They suppose that they are in general of the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, with some among them of the tribe of Levi. Why wouldn't they know? Because remember, we read that the children were stripped from their parents and sent to the islands. So they had a vague idea of their history, but not as complete a history they would have had if they hadn't separated the families.
And we remember we looked at that with the Islamic slave trade. So we know that that's a sure thing. In fact, I should have that note open since we're done with this one on the Ashkenazi. We're done with the Ashkenazi. We're going to look at a note here. I should open it. I'm opening it now. Right here. I just want to show you something here. All right. It's going to go down. Yeah, talk about that slave trade a little bit. Because I want to show you. So I'm going to show you a video also on a scripture fulfillment for something that's also historical. But I want to show you something, right? Just want to show you this again down here. Remember we had looked at that? That was a 660 AD or 660 AD, 650 AD. Also, it continued on. You can see a little more talk of that slave trade. It's important to understand. Not many people know this, but that slave trade, the way that the slave trade worked out, there's a lot of information showing that the connection with the Ottomans and the slave trade to how they managed their slaves. A lot of them took tips and advice from the Ottomans on how they managed their slaves, because how the Ottomans managed their slaves. They thought that they had great control over their slaves, but they, as you can see, they were slaughtering them. So that's why you see that it's going over how a lot of them lost their history, but a lot of them still hold their history a little bit. So you can they're still holding on to it, but you're going to see here what's going to happen.
During slavery, the Europeans separated black families. They stripped mothers and daughters and sons and fathers. They destroyed black families. What did the Democrats do in the 90s? They made a law and stripped all the black men out of the homes. And then they started locking the children up in prisons, the school to prison pipeline. This stuff is just a repeat of history.
Nothing new in the sun.
Y'all can get mad all you want to and vote for your prosecutor all you want to. I don't care how mad you get at me for saying it. Vote for a prosecutor if you want to. That's stupid. That's absolutely stupid. When we know the reason we need prison reform is because of the 94 crime bill. And now some of y'all are defending the crime bill, blaming the brothers that got locked up over a plant. Pure evilness to lock somebody up for life over a plant. And now y'all want to vote for a prosecutor, and then y'all call some of us coons because we don't want to support it. Y'all are out of y'all mind. Some of y'all are out of your mind. This is the same thing that they've been doing. separating families, destroying families through their laws. But anyway,
he was talking about how some laws are made that actually have demonic backgrounds to it, demonic secrets to it. That a lot of these things that you're going to see today is very important to know that these things are known by a lot of the higher ups.
So now these people claim descent from the tribe of Judah. She says in general, they believe they're from Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. That is the southern kingdom. So now you have black people over in America, some of them claiming they are tribe of Judah. But remember, Nefertiti said there was no reason, that none of this evidence existed. We were making this stuff up, reading it out of context, right? So let's keep going. If we're reading this stuff out of context and we're making this stuff up and the history doesn't exist, we should not be able to keep pulling this stuff out. And again, when was Hannah Adams' book written? Let me pull the date up again. Let me see. It was republished in 2009. This right here, The History of the Jews, The Destruction of Jerusalem to the Present Time by Hannah Adams. Applewood Books republished this. The History of the Jews was originally published in 1818. I'm sorry, let me go back up. Was originally published in 1818. So that's the original publication. 1818. We all clear here? 1818. Now, I did forget to give you this one. Let me go back here. I'll pull this for you guys, but yeah, this is 1450 to 1800. But anyway, I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to get stuck there. So now we're going to go from Hannah Adams. I told you we're going to talk about Claudius Buchanan because he talked about the black Jews in Cochin, India. She just quoted Buchanan. So now here is Buchanan. Did I pull up his title right here? The Works of the Reverend Claudius Buchanan, LLD. And this is a super long title for no reason. 1812. Here we go. Does it say here? Anyway, 1812. We'll see what other information we can pull real quick before we go forward. University of Michigan. So when they tell you they've published this, make them show you the receipts, original from the University of Michigan. Make them show you the receipts, make them call out the University of Michigan by name. All right, so we see there. Now, this is Claudius Buchanan. He says, I have now been in Cochin or its vicinity for upwards of 2 months and have got well acquainted with the Jews. They do not live in the city of Cochin, but in a town about a mile distant from it, called Jewstown. It is almost wholly inhabited by the Jews, who have 2 respectable synagogues. Let me see if this is the whole thing I want to read. Yeah. Okay, cool. 2 respectable synagogues. Among them are some very intelligent men who are not ignorant of the present history of nations. There are also Jews here from the remote parts of Asia, so that this is the fountain of intelligence concerning that people in the East. There being constant communication by ships with the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the mouths of the Indus. This is what Hannah Adams was talking about, the constant communication. The resident Jews are divided into 2 classes called the Jerusalem or white Jews and the ancient or black Jews. The white Jews reside at this place. The black Jews also have a synagogue here, but the great body of that tribe inhabit towns in the interior of the province. I have now seen most of both classes. My inquiries refer chiefly to their antiquity, their manuscripts, and their sentiments concerning the present state of their nation. So anyway, he'll get onto this, and he says, on my inquiry into the antiquity of the white Jews, they first delivered to me a narrative in the Hebrew language of their arrival in India, which has been handed down to them from their fathers. Remember the verse? Our fathers have inherited lies. So this was handed down to them, right? It says, and then exhibited their ancient brass plate containing their charter and freedom of residence given by King Malabar. The following is a narrative of events relating to their first arrival. Now, I'm not going to read all this because it's nonsense, and he knows it's nonsense, and I'm going to prove to you he knows it's nonsense because right here, let me see. The black Jews. It is only just listen to what he says about the black Jews. It is only necessary to look at the countenance of the black Jews to be satisfied that their ancestors must have arrived in India many ages before the white Jews. So the white Jews gave him that long story. He said, I only need to look at these people and tell that they're the real deal. They're Hindu complexion and their very imperfect resemblance to the European Jews indicate they have been detached from the parent stock in Judea many ages before the Jews in the West. So now he talks about the white Jews looking upon the black Jews as inferior. Now listen to this. The black Jews communicate. Oh wait, let me back up.
So just for the sake of summary, basically it's the same thing like you can do with anything. Visuals. This person's saying based upon the visual evidence, the only thing that makes sense between these two groups is that visually the darker skinned Judeans are the ancient Judeans. That's what he's saying there. That he knows that these later ones, which we also seen the proof with other documents showing that indeed is true, that the ones that came later on are going to be a newer people, not the ancient Judeans, but a newer people. So it's very important to understand that. Amen, family. You got to wake up because this is the truth. This is absolutely the truth. So from this day forward, for the sake of understanding, sometimes it might get kind of controversial, but it's not controversial because it's truth. But what we're going to go over, right? What we're going to go over is the exact information that we need to go over on these things, which is truth, right? Let me actually restart that screen share on there because it just became black. Let me now switch it. I hope it was showing that screen when I was doing that. I don't know if it's switching between them. I'm not sure because I can't see it on my end. If you can't see it, oh, there it goes. Okay. All right. So like I said, visuals, right? This is from before Christ, right? This is 300 BC, 200 AD, right? This is really, really early for the sake of understanding. It also could have been later, but they know that this. You can see the Egyptians here, right? You can see what the Egyptians would look like, darker skin, right? The Egyptians all over here. This would be the Red Sea, the parting of the sea, as you can see here. And then this would be the Israelites. This would be God right here. And this would be Moses. This would be Aaron, right? What we can see here, just for and we can look at actual findings of the Egyptians, right? Visually seeing the Egyptians makes a big difference, and the time frame is also important to know what Egyptians am I showing you. I'm not because sometimes you will see some results of people saying, some of the DNA results. They say, oh, the Egyptians got darker over time. And understand what does the Bible tell us? The Egyptians were Hamites, so it would just be that they were Hamites and got even more mixed with Ham. That's all that we would see there. And it wouldn't be so surprising to see Egyptians mix, right? It's not like they wouldn't be like, oh, we're pure. We're how the Israelites were. But let's go up and look at this, right? We're looking at Ramses. We're looking at the times of Moses, right? These are actual images of the Egyptians, right? Egyptian queen, Ramses' wife, right? What you can see right here. And you can see some things of Ramses, some of the Egyptians, right? You can see these things visually. That's what that person's saying there. Visually, he knows which one are the ancient Jews.
Yeah, right there. The black Jews. Now, I want you guys to read this in its entirety for your own sakes. But he says, the black Jews communicated to me much interesting intelligence concerning their brethren, the ancient Israelites in the East. He refers to them as ancient Israelites. This is what Hannah Adams was referencing. He refers to them as ancient Israelites, and he said you only got to look at them and tell them they arrived here long before these white people did. I didn't say that. Am I reading that out of context? Am I reading that out of context? It is only necessary to look at the countenance of the black Jews to be satisfied that their ancestors must have arrived in India many ages before the white Jews. So if you guys want to read about the black Jews and coach in India, please go to this Claudius Buchanan link that I'm going to put in the description for you. So let's continue. Now this book right here, we're going to move through history a little bit because see, we're connecting all this because she says we have made up this history and there's no reason for us to believe that this stuff is what we say it is. This is the Biafran War and post-colonial humanitarianism. This is from Cambridge University Press. We're going to look at a couple of Cambridge documents. Now, right here, the 1966 massacres were vital to the Eastern leadership's decision to secede. Yet to understand their significance, Hold on, let me start over. Yet to understand their significance for the escalation of the conflict, the massacres have to be situated within a longer history of suspicions and fears which characterize inter-ethnic relations in Nigeria since late colonial times. Anti-Igbo propaganda featured prominently in federal constructions of nationhood in the Sabam Gary, the strangers' quarters of Hausa cities. The Igbos have reportedly become victims of persecution and violence. Victim narratives thus held a special place in Igbo cultural memory because of, for example, the riots in Jos in 1945, Kano 1953, during which the Igbos have been targeted. These outbreaks, however, were also driven by Northerners' fears about Igbo domination. A fertile ground for Igbo exceptionalism was hence already in place before 1966. Against this background, an analogy that already had a long history in Igbo tribal ethnography became increasingly important. The idea that Igbos descended from one of the lost tribes of Israel. By the mid-19th century, listen to this part, the conviction that the ancient Jews, there goes that term again, had migrated to sub-Saharan Africa. Don't they keep saying we're sub-Saharan Africans? And yet,
what is sub-Sahara? What does it mean, sub-Saharan Africa? That's what they found out when they said that when they did a study on the Egyptians, they said they became more sub-Saharan. For the sake of understanding, just to show you that, I just typed it down so you can see sub-Saharan people, and you can see right here, this is the location. It's saying, because this was they went down to, right? So it's saying they became more this, right? Just to show you, just to have a little information on that, if you don't know about, it's saying that the sub-Saharan African, just for the sake of understanding. That's just clear even when we look at, like I said, the imagery. But let's proceed through it. Shalom, shalom, family.
We see right here, published by Cambridge University, against the background and analogy that had already had a long history of Igbo tribal ethnography became increasingly important. The idea that the Igbos descended from one of the lost tribes of Israel. By the mid-19th century, the conviction that the ancient Jews had migrated to sub-Saharan Africa was widely held among missionaries, ethnographers, and educated West Africans trying to unravel the origin of Africa's peoples steeped in myths and legend.
What is it saying there? He's saying that the Africans knew that they were different than these people. In fact, I want to show you two things. I want to show you two things real fast. That there is papers that are out with definitions of who are the people, right? In the definition of, if we look at the definition of Ham and Shem and whatnot, I want you to see that the definition of Ham does not include the Negro. Understand this. Watch what it says here. So you see, that's just some information. So we're gonna look at some definitions. I'm just gonna turn that down. So this is just talking about some information. This is very, very great because it's gonna show you different Bibles with the same definition for Ham. So you can see the dark-skinned races, which is very clear. Ham, Egypt, Cush, Put, Canaan. These are going to be the darker skinned races, right? But not the Negroes. See what it's saying there, right? Well, he's going to show you both those pieces put together so you can see that, right? You can see they were not the forefathers of the Negroid races. Why? Because who's a Negroid race? Shem. They knew 100% who Shem was, right? That's what you're seeing there. So this is the Young's Bible definition. It's showing you even they knew that the Hamites are not also the Negroids. As we know, tracing it back, the Negroids are linked to the understanding that they are Judeans, right? That is 100%. And this actually shows that they knew that, so that they even put it in the definition that though they had darker skin, they are not the same people. See what it's saying there? Even the Africans knew that in the area. And we're going to show you that even they show the difference, right? I'm going to show you a different one on how they show the difference. So same one, the same definition, right? You can see him, but as you can see, he became the predecessors of the dark race. Ham became the predecessor of the dark races, not the Negroes, right? But the Egyptians, Ethiopians, etc. See how it's showing you that? Like, this is actually in the definitions. It makes no sense today how the whole world had made a lie when the definition is so much evidence. The evidence is a mountain. Is a mountain of evidence. Understand this. Is a mountain of actual evidence that shows us these things, right? Let's actually look at, that was that definition. Let's look to a different one. I want to show you a different one now. I want to show you a different one now because this one is actually prophecy. This one's actually really, really interesting. I want you to see this because this one is really interesting. I'm going to go up to that one I wanted to show you. And now I'm going to show you what the scripture says, right? Like I said, all types of evidence, scientifical, scriptural, all types of evidence. I want you to hear this scripture. If you read in the book of Job, right, just type down, I'll leave this here. Let's just go to Job 3. Job 3 is a great detailed story of the condition of Israel before the Lord returns. It says, for behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah. When I bring again the captivity of Judah, right? What is this talking about? The first captivity, the second captivity? It's talking about the last captivity, right? It's talking about the last captivity before he gathers them. As he says, I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Look at how the people are sold, right? They have cast lot for my people. And notice what he says here. Note on how they were sold. Watch what it says here. And given a boy for a harlot and sold a girl for wine that they might drink. And notice who they talk about. Oh, Tyre and Zidon. Who is Tyre and Zidon? These are going to be the African, more of the African races. And Palatine. Who's Palatine, right? Islam, for the sake of understanding. Ishmael, right? Ottomans, right? What did we see? Ancient history showed us that, remember, the Ottomans, the Palatine, they had them first. They also sold some of the people to the Europeans, but also the Africans sold the Shemites. Is this just a random statement or is this proof? Let's actually look at this. I want you to see something here that this is actually a true statement. The scripture made the statement before it happened. Nope, you're going to see this saying, sold a girl for wine that they might drink and a boy for a harlot, right? Very important to understand this. Very important to understand this saying here. So this is an African. He's going to be making an apology for basically selling the people. And notice how he says they sold the people. Watch how he sold the people here. Watch how the details on it. So this is what I want you to hear, right? The details is how they sold the people, right? They cast lot for my people and given a boy for a harlot, right? Notice that, and then sold a girl for wine. I'm just going to highlight that, and we're going to come back to it. Okay, watch what happens here. Make sure you can hear this.
They deceived us with liquor.
They deceived us with liquor.
And all other temptations.
Because he's apologizing for selling the people to the Europeans. Now also that's also mentioned here too. Watch what it says right here. And they cast lot for my people, right? Remember he said they deceived them with liquor. Sold a girl for wine that they may drink, right? And a boy for a harlot and all other temptations. That's what he said there, right? Just for one more time, that clarity. Watch what he says right here. I'm going to go right here.
People with guns, and we had no guns. They deceived us with liquor and all other temptations.
Okay, you see what's going on here? You see how it connects that? Notice also what it says here, right? It says they're the ones that were involved with this. And it says you have sold them for wine and for a harlot, for liquor and all other temptations, right? And notice what he says right here. He says the children of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have you sold to the Grecians. Who are the Grecians? If you do a little history, I'm just going to show you for the sake of understanding, for the sake of the live. Let's do a little research. The Grecians go. Let's look this up real fast. Very clear one. This one is clear too, but that one has some weird images. So I'm gonna go down to this one, a little more safe. Watch what it says right here.
Once there was a princess who was the epitome of beauty. Appeared to her and so enchanted her.
And skip a little ahead.
Europa stayed, and it.
So you can see, just for the sake of understanding, I'm just gonna quickly summarize it. Europa came from the Greeks, and then that's how you see
formed the name of a whole continent.
Europe.
What?
So very important to understand. The link is actually showing us here that is saying they were sold to the Greeks. Who are the Greeks? The Europeans. That's what it's saying there. It's saying that the Hamites sold the people to the Europeans, which is evident for the triangular slave trade. That's what you're seeing there. And as well as the backup information. Look at how it all consists in order. The Bible, not just a historical book, but a book full of prophecy that comes to pass, as it is said, word for word. But let's proceed.
The Jewish connection held a special allure for many Africans. With it, divine genealogy could be constructed, which created some distance from the Christian missionaries associated with colonial power. Accordingly, many Igbos also began to consider themselves the Jews of Africa. So now, he said it already had a long history. One more time, against the background, an analogy that already had a long history in Igbo tribal ethnography became increasingly important. The idea that the Igbos descended from one of the lost tribes of Israel. By the mid-19th century, the conviction that the ancient Jews had migrated to sub-Saharan Africa was widely held among missionaries, ethnographers, and educated West Africans trying to unravel the origin of Africa's peoples steeped in myth and legend. So now, are we making this stuff up? Are we reading this out of context? She said there's no reason to believe this. So now we see the Igbos specifically are associated with these Jews that were dropped off in West Africa. Why is that important? We're going to see. Because when we look at the slave database, the slave names database put together by Emory University, we're going to see Igbos aboard those slave ships. But let's keep going. U.S. Department of State Archive. Now, let me see how to find stuff on this page. Fine. There we go. Let's find the word Igbos right here. Let's see. Right here. Now, this is from state.gov.
This was an interesting one. I'm gonna just see how everyone's doing. This is one going to be interesting. The whole world. It even said, like we said, the scripture word for word said there was going to be not one nation, not one they wouldn't go into. That's throughout all time. Because remember it said, Jerusalem shall be trampled down by who? The Gentiles, until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. And it said, until that time is fulfilled, they shall go into captivity into every single nation. As we looked at yesterday, it said not one nation they would not go into. As it says of Elam, they would not. It would be every single nation they would go into, for the sake of understanding. But let's proceed. Watch this one.
Again, I'm going to read this. Foreign Relations, 1969 and 1976. Documents on Africa, 1969 and 1972.
You see how we're kind of honing in? You see how it started off ancient, and I kind of gave you the understanding on how the people were being destroyed. It gave you that opening to kind of give you that time of confusion where Islam was kind of attacking them, destroying everyone of that darker skin. And then you seen the recording documents showing the conversion of the other ones. And then you see it's kind of working its way up to our time, right?
Memorandum, the White House, Washington, Tuesday, January 28, 1969. Memorandum for the President from Henry A. Kissinger. Subject, U.S. options in Biafra relief. Now, let's go down here. Biafra, 3,000 square miles, 4 to 6 million. Colonel Ojukwu, 35, British-trained, erstwhile playboy, presides over the population, popular support, and military morale of a people convinced that defeat means extinction. The Igbos are the wandering Jews of West Africa, gifted, aggressive, westernized, at best, envied and resented, but mostly despised by the mass of their neighbors in the Federation. They have fought well by African standards against heavy odds. Their cynical public relations use of starvation has been brilliant.
So they were starving them. That's just so you know, they was afflicting a lot of damage on the people. So they were starving the people out.
The Igbos are the wandering Jews of West Africa. Henry Kissinger said this in a letter to the president. Yet she says we're taking this out of context and this up. We have no reason to believe that, according to the urban apologist and Nefertiti. So let's keep going.
Shalom, shalom, family. Shalom. See how everyone's doing. I'm gonna close this. Shalom, shalom. So let's continue.
We're at the university now. And then I'm going to cut it again and put all this stuff together later because everything keeps messing up when I was trying to record this. Now, page 34, University of Michigan. I'll scroll back to page 34. This right here, John Ogilvy, 1600 to 1676. This is the document that people keep suggesting. I'm going to have a link where you can get it for free from the University of Michigan. Africa, being an accurate description of the regions of Egypt, Barbary, Libya, Bulindograd, and the land of Negroes, Guinea, Ethiopia, and the Absines. With all the adjacent islands, blah, you guys can read all that stuff. This is the world's longest title. So now, let's go back to page 4. Let me get here. Page 34, and I quote, many Jews also are scattered over this region. Some natives, boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger. Let me read that again. Some natives, boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger. Others are Asian strangers who fled either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian or from Judea, wasted and depopulated by the Romans, Persians, Saracens, and Christians.
See, remember what we talked about? This is why we start from the root. We gathered out to the end of the branch, right? It happened during the time of the Romans, right? You also have some things where, remember, there's some that was still scattered in the area where the Persians were, and then you got obviously the Crusades during that time, and you have all these things happening that time. So you can see how it's all connecting together.
This is the Niger River here. Both sides of the river Niger. Over here you're going to find Ghana. Over here you're going to find Nigeria.
Let's just look at this. You see where they're at? They're saying that this is where the Jews were, right? That's what that document's saying. Just for the sake of understanding, I should also, let me grab that. Let's grab that map. I want to grab that map for you. And while he's showing it right there, I want to show you something. I'm going to go to that map there. I'm going to go right here. Let's grab that map. So I'm going to grab this map so you can see this is that area. But I'm going to grab the map here. And let's click it. So you can remember how we went over this. This map, obviously being before America was even a place, for the sake of understanding, you can see just gives you how old it was, 1747. You can see it's very, very old. Let's look at this, right? This is the area that's pointing out. You can see right there that he's showing even that where that river is, right here. Just right there, right at that corner, and lifts up. Where Benny is, like Benjamin, right? You can see be coming out right here, right? Got the river. And then you got right there, the area. So you can see it's showing you that area where it's pointed out at. Just for the sake of understanding. I'm going to close this and we'll continue.
I challenge any urban apologist, any Christian on the fence, anybody that wants truth to Google Jews of Nigeria. And they will tell you that the Igbo there are now they've been embracing their Israelite heritage. Google Jews in Ghana. So when you go back and you watch Nefertiti's lying video with Damon Richardson, and they ask a voodoo priest in the middle of Benin, the old kingdom of Dahomey that conquered Juda, which was Juda, and he says, nobody knows about Judah here, he's lying. Why would the enemies of Judah, the enemies of Israel, why would you go to them to ask them about Israel? Why wouldn't you go to somebody in Nigeria or Ghana to find out about what was going on here? See, when you start to see all this evidence, it becomes clear that the only way that she could make a statement such as, what was it? Because there's neither biblical or historical evidence to suggest we are, only misinterpreted verses and revising a history. They ignore verses in history that proves them wrong and create fantasies about a history that doesn't exist. Time and time again, an analytical approach to their evidence reveals it's faulty. This is the habit with the Hebrew Israelites. What have I read into any of this? What history have I been revising? What fantasy am I creating? He said both sides of the river Niger. Many Jews are also scattered over this region. This is what was said by John Ogilvie in the 1600s. This is what is written on this map in 1774 where we see this. And they say,
so you can see this one, 1774 is a different one. There's that one that reads that it says there was Jews in this area, for the sake of understanding. But for the sake of clarity, this is all what this is bringing forth truth in its rightful place. That's what you're seeing here. As the Lord says, you're going to have double for your confusion. So just understand that as you support the real truth, the blessings really will come if you go for the truth. As it says, the truth will set you free, right? Let's proceed.
Jews are in the region. This is what is written in 1890 that the Jews were there. It was written in 1877 that the Jews were there. We see it again in 1882 the Jews were there. We see this from the document talking about the 1400s right here, that the Jews were there. We see this over here. King John II was this from. 1851, the Jews were there. The only person that is denying this, the only people denying this are the white Christians and the urban apologists. I'm going to pause this right here, and then I'm going to come back and finish this up. All right, so now both sides of the Niger River. I'm going to read this again one more time because this is important. Some natives, themselves of Abraham's seed, that's lineage, inhabiting both sides of the Niger River. Both sides of the river Niger. Others are Asian strangers who fled thither either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian or from Judea wasted and depopulated by the Romans, Persians, Saracens, and Christians. They were fleeing from the Christians. Isn't that what it said about some of the Portuguese? They were deported, and you'll find that if you keep studying, some tried to buy passage away from Portugal and Spain because they were fleeing from the Christians.
Now, this is actually probably, it said that they will go back the way that they came. They will go back into, they said they will go back the way into Egypt, and then from Egypt, from that area, they would go into slavery into Egypt. And that reference to Egypt, another Egypt, is a reference that the whole world would become like an Egypt to Israel, for sake of understanding.
So anyway, this is the Niger River, both sides, Nigeria and Ghana. I challenge you to go look that up. Matter of fact, we're going to do it right now, since we're looking at it.
Skip a little ahead.
Of Nigeria.
Oh, I was let it play. Okay.
See, I want you guys to see the history of Jews in Nigeria. Igbo Jews. That's from Wikipedia. Inside Nigeria's Jewish community. How Nigerian Jews are getting caught in a new separatist, with like all this stuff here. Nigerian Virtual Jewish History Tour. Nigeria's Igbo Jews, a lost tribe of Israel. This is from CNN. So, Jews of Ghana. I have a friend named Amma. You guys will see her on Facebook often. She is from Ghana, and she talks to me about the Jewish history. Lost Jews of Ghana. This is from CJ News, Wikipedia, the history of Jews in Ghana. Ghana Virtual Jewish History Tour. This is all over the place. Why is this important? Let's go back and look at this map. Because Ghana's over here. Nigeria is here. Benin is here where Judah was. So how is it over here and over here you got Israelites? And up in here you got Israelites according to the map. But you're telling me down in here there was no Israel where they were taken from the slave coast? Be honest. At some point, the urban apologists need to be honest and stop saying that this evidence doesn't exist. Stop lying to people, humble yourselves, get rid of your pride, and admit you were wrong. We aren't making this stuff up. We aren't delusional. We aren't revising history. I'm giving you multiple sources. We're going to keep going. This right here, a tribute to the Negro, being a vindication of the moral, intellectual, and religious capabilities of the colored portion of mankind. Now, hold on. Let me go back before we pass Ogilvy. I want to go to page 721 with Ogilvy real quick. Page 721 is way down here. All right. And we're going to come back to that other one in just a second. This is... Yeah, so most of the book is here, and it's from the University of Michigan, so you guys can access it for free. I didn't pay anything for this. So if Nefertiti or somebody else tells you they can't examine this source, they're lying. Goodness. Some of these are... Here we go. 721. Here we go. All right, let me see where it's at.
I'm going to skip a little ahead. He finds it.
Seem to be extracted. So these black Jews, because remember,
go back a little bit.
Upon their refusal.
So it's like,
not right here. Let me see, because some of these are just in statements and paragraphs. I just want to make sure I got the right one. Here's right here. Some have reported that John, king of Portugal, sold the Jews for slaves upon their refusing to embrace the Christian religion, and baptizing their children sent them thither, whence the islanders seem to be extracted. So these black Jews, because remember we read that they were Jews from Portugal. We read that the Spanish Jew is always dark complexioned. We know that the Spanish Jews went into Portugal, and now it says King John sold the Jews for slaves when they refused to embrace the Christian religion. And then he baptized their children as Christians. So we see this is consistent. So now, we're going to keep going. Let me see here. All right, a tribute to the Negro being a vindication of the moral, intellectual, and religious capabilities of the colored portion of mankind. There's a lot here with particular African race. This is 1848. 1848. All right, let me see how far. We're not going to go too far. And it does talk about vitiligo and some other stuff. So anyway, we're going to read a passage here. The Jews, however slightly their features may have assimilated to those of other nations amongst whom they are scattered, from the cause... I'm sorry, let me start over. The Jews, however slightly their features may have assimilated to those of other nations amongst whom they are scattered, from the causes already stated, certainly form a very striking example as regards the uncertainty of the perpetuity in color. Descended from one stock and prohibited by the most sacred institutions from intermarrying with the people of other nations, and yet dispersed, according to the divine prediction, into every country on the globe, this one people is marked with the colors of all: fair in Britain and Germany, brown in France and in Turkey, swarthy in Portugal and in Spain, olive in Syrian Chaldea, tawny and copper colored in Arabian Egypt, whilst they are black at Congo in Africa. Now, I'm going to get into the white Jews on a completely separate video because it's important. You'll see that they keep talking about black or white Jews. Now, this also gets into what Nefertiti claims is one of my sources, where they start to say, now see, I'm going to read this for this reason, because see, they can't accept that any of the Jews are black. And so they have to convince themselves that these people had to have changed color. And I'm going to read this. And that's what in 2018 that they're proposing in that document that Nefertiti talks about. It says the researchers of Dr. Pritchard have dispelled many of the ideas formerly entertained with respect to the general persistency of color and features in the human race, especially of color on which the greatest stress has been laid. In some particular states of the Constitution, the skin of whites becomes either wholly or in part black. So white people turn black. On the other hand, it is well known that the black loses part of his original tint in a state of civilization. This is where it gets ridiculous. It is remarked in the United States, that while Negroes kept in the field labor...
Very important to understand. Watch what he says here. He says that only in the United States is there a notice of a change where somehow the Jews became a different color.
Their pristine color, those who are domesticated as servants become paler at the second and subsequent generations and also lose their African features and other peculiarities. That's because the women were being raped in that house, and the second and third generations were European. They were watered down with tons of European DNA. That's why I said in the United States this happens. Like they don't know. So there are also instances of Negroes losing their original color, wholly or in part, under the influence of disease or some other constitutional affection. We know that vitiligo, and we know about albinism. So anyway, he goes on to talk about white people that turn black and black people that turn white. We know that black people can turn white, for lack of a better word, not Caucasian. But anyway, this is what it goes on to talk about. Now, swarthy in Portugal and Spain. Let me go back up here. Swarthy in Portugal and Spain. Like I said, I'm going to address this white Jew thing because I have a whole presentation on that, because just as much information about white Jews can be found, just as much information about black Jews and white Jews can be found if you want to look for it. And you will get an explanation as to how these people came about. So swarthy. Now, some people will say, well, swarthy just means dark. It could be white people with a tan, Europeans with a tan. Okay, let's look up the, definition. Swarthy. Swarthy, dark skin, dark complexion. Translation is more definition. English swarthy, English swart, late 16th century, see swart. Swart, swarthy. The German word zwart. Okay. Does swarthy mean black? Swarthy means dark skin. So they keep using that word dark. So let's see what the Dutch word zwart means, and then we'll look at the German word. Having dark skin. Close that down right there. Zwart, Dutch English translation. Black. The color which these words are printed. Black, something, e.g., black in color. So now we see that the root of these words is black. And we can go look at the German if you want to as well. And I'm just doing this because we know the urban apologists aren't going to go out of their way to actually do any research like this and present you guys with all the information. Swartz, black. German English means black. So swarthy is black. So everything is consistent. Let me see if I can find my way back to this where we were. No, wait, we were back over here. All right, so now they're swarthy in Portugal and Spain. Isn't that what the other one said? Spanish Jews are always dark complexion. They were called black Jews. Now we see they're called swarthy or black, a tribute for the Negro.
Now, just for the sake of understanding this information, why is this information important? Because a lot of people, they'll tell you, oh, it doesn't matter. They'll say it doesn't matter, yet they'll tell you with all authority that the Ashkenazi who is of Gomer is Judean. So it's important to understand that these things do matter, right? Especially if they want to make a claim, yet they have no evidence to back it up. Understand this. This is real evidence put together. Yep, there's a because they're color, because they're God's children. Yep, that's right. In fact, some deep understanding on that story of Ishmael, right? There's a quick summary of Ishmael. Ishmael was born from the Egyptian, right? Joseph was sold to the Ishmaelites, right? He was sold to Egypt to the Ishmaelites, right? And they sold him to Egypt. We also see when Jerusalem fell the first time, Ishmael was right there to do some harm. Ishmael's always playing a picture because it's a curse. Ishmael, as it said, is a son of the bondwoman. And it says that Ishmael itself will be an enemy of everyone. That's what it says of Ishmael. That's why from Ishmael shall come forth the beast. Very important to understand that. But that's another subject for the sake of understanding. But let's proceed.
Being a vindication, this is 1848. But let's keep going. So now this is going to bring us here. I don't want to read that first. I don't want to do that one first. Let me push this back toward the end, and we're going to keep going. So now, this right here, Black Jews, the Religious Challenge, or Politics versus Religion, by Ulysses Santa Maria, published in 1987. This is on JSTOR and by Cambridge University Press. It's published by Cambridge University Press. It's on JSTOR. Now, Nefertiti claims that we give them inaccessible articles, which means we haven't read them either. This is a lie, because I have a JSTOR account. And so now I pay my JSTOR membership fee. And we're going to start here at page 229. So if she doesn't want to pay for access to JSTOR, that's on her. So now I want you guys, I don't want you guys to do that. I'm going to read this real quick. And it's a couple places I want to touch on here. The founding myths. In a society with non-existent collective memories, for which the past only exists in fragments and cannot be discovered through tangible facts, events, written or archaeological documents, there is a vital need to create an artificial or mythical past, which is what Nefertiti and them are claiming we're doing. If this historical past does not exist, society must in effect elaborate myths in order to explain its origins. Watch
what this explains. It tells you that the idea of African American is recorded to be made up. That it wasn't something that was natural. It's something that was given to a people. Watch what happens here.
Its value as an element of continuity. Thus, the original myth formulates what a society claims as its origin at the beginning of time. It locates its structures, the religious and social basis of the group. The study of this myth reveals the ambitions of the human group that elaborated, adopted, and propagated it. Few human groups or societies could have a greater need to attach themselves to a past or create one than the Black American community. As the black men who were torn from the African continent, their homeland is Africa. America was originally peopled by red Indians who were colonized by the white man. Black men were imported forcibly onto this continent. Their presence in America and why and the wherefore of their installation on American soil are known. The American plantations' increasing need for a servile labor force, for a slave labor force, which was collected by slave ships from the African coast and transported to the American continent. This traffic in black slaves was called triangular traffic, since the stopping points of Europe, Africa, and America made a triangle. All right, so now we know that Juda was in West Africa and that they were being deported or enslaved, and they got deported from Portugal and then got enslaved and taken to America, Europe, and other ports in Africa. And we'll see that in a second. So now, on page 220, we're going to go back to page 220. We're going to jump around a little bit because there's a few things I want to touch on in here. 22, 221, 220. Now, they love to talk about cherry. The urban apologists love to talk about cherry. We're going to read pages 220 and 221. We're not going to read this whole thing. They love to talk about cherry. And so we're going to read these 2 pages here. In the first months of 1879, there was a massive migration of some 5,000 blacks to the northern territory of the United States, mainly Kansas and Oklahoma. This exodus was of despairing blacks seeking a refuge, a place where their political rights would mean something, where they would be free from the economic exploitation and, above all, from the dangerous activities of the Ku Klux Klan. One of the members of this exodus was Benjamin Pap Singleton, an elderly and colorful man who had led a group of 300 blacks to Cherokee County in Kansas. There they founded the colony, Singleton's Colony, Singleton calling himself the Moses of the exodus of colored people. Now, from 1900 onwards, North and South Carolina were overrun by black preachers who were propagating a doctrine according to which the lost tribes of the house of Israel was none other than the Negroes. So, I've pointed this out before. The urban apologists keep pretending like it doesn't exist. They keep pretending like Cambridge University didn't publish this. Although this might at first sight seem an odd claim, it can be seen as reflecting the beliefs that some black slaves had held during their captivity when they were interrogated on their origins, their destiny. So why did black slaves hold this belief? I thought we were making this stuff up. They are talking about we believe a history that doesn't exist, and yet now we're seeing that our ancestors who were enslaved believed that they were Israel. Cambridge University once again says, although this might at first seem an odd claim, it can be seen as reflecting the beliefs that some black slaves had held during their captivity when they were interrogated on their origins, their destiny. A historical example supports this hypothesis. A slave uprising took place in Richmond, Virginia at the beginning of the 19th century. The beginning of the 19th century, which is the 1800s, which was led by a slave called Gabriel Prosser.
So this, just for the sake of understanding, he's saying, now some people think the Hebrew Israelite movement is new. The slaves, they knew when they woke up, a lot of them, they knew, as it says, even while being slaves, they knew that they were Israelites. Even this person says a historical example supports this idea for the sake of understanding. He says that history supports this, which we already see that.
An outstanding personality who had acquired some knowledge of the Bible. He frequently referred to it in order to convince his brothers that they were descendants of the Israelites and that God would free them from slavery as he had their ancestors. I thought we were making this stuff up and taking it out of context. Now we're reading about slaves that looked in the Bible, said we're Israel, and God is going to free us from this slavery. If you guys have ever heard the song Kumbaya, why are they calling out to Yah? Why are black people who are supposedly not Israel calling out to Yah, the God of Israel, for help from slavery? Kumbaya is not a campfire song. It's a cry for help from the Most High God of Israel. He identified himself with Samson, his favorite Bible character. Like Samson, he wore his hair long as a sign given by God of the alliance made with his people. Gabriel Prosser was convinced that God had chosen him to free his people from the depths of slavery. Like a black Samson, he would break the chains of slavery and found a nation of free blacks in America. His fall was dramatic. During a night raid, a violent storm broke. His companions, petrified, fled, convinced that they were the victims of divine wrath. They abandoned him.
So obviously it's planning to come to pass. Think of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Think of 70 AD. Think of any time when Israel tried to stand up against the Lord, right? His will is what happens, right? He said they shall go into captivity in every nation until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled, right? They shall fall by the sword, shall go into captivity in every single nation. And we see, as the scripture says, Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. So you can see right here, this just shows us even all the way back in the 18th century. You can see that this is actually introducing that.
What should be emphasized here is the impact of the Old Testament, the sacred book of the Jews, on Negro mentality. As evidence of its importance, one only has to look at black popular culture, which has become an expression of this. In the history of the Jews, the history of Israel written down in what Christians call the Old Testament, the divine being is accessible. God is revealed to man. This contact, this kind of relationship with the divine being inevitably attracted the black spirit. What's more secure than a God who is responsive to his people's sufferings, aware of their poverty, helping them in exile, leading them from slavery? The history of the Jewish people, persecuted, dispersed, exiled, reduced to slavery, must have seemed close to that of the blacks who themselves were reduced to slavery. The ancient Hebrews were saved from slavery, and the blacks would be too. So why is it the story matches so close? Another thing the urban apologists will tell you is that none of this stuff matches. Not just urban apologists. Many racist white Christians will say, well, none of that matches. Deuteronomy 8 doesn't match you. And yet we're reading right here, Cambridge University says, well, stuff seems to match the Negroes very closely. So now, let's keep going. I'm going to go to page 23. And we're going to read something from there. Again, this link will be in the description so you can read the whole thing yourself. So they don't say, well, you're not reading the whole text and you're leaving stuff out. Please go read this whole text yourself so we don't have to hear their mouth later. Let me see. Right here. Page 23. This is Cherry. They love to talk about Cherry, right? Now, you read from the beginning of the 19th century. We just read that. Beginning of the 19th century. That's the 1800s. Cherry doesn't come in until 1915. It says around 1915, the first communities of blacks were organized, which called their members Black Jews. They act like this stuff came out of nowhere. No, the awakening has just grown bigger now. They started out in Washington, Philadelphia, New York, and in other less important towns of the East. Their most significant characteristics lay in their personal interpretation and rudimentary knowledge of the law and customs of the Orthodox Jews. Some allowed the eating of pork, while others turned this prohibition into the central tenet of their belief system. Some even saw Jesus as a black Jew who had been persecuted by Gentiles. So this isn't new. This has been going on since the 1800s, 1900s at least here in America. In Philadelphia, under the leadership of the prophet Cherry, the Church of God group stated that the label Negroes was erroneous, since the real Jews were blacks. They saw the church as a synagogue.
Just for the sake of understanding, you see that? I just want to go and just show you something real fast. Not. All right. Look what it says right here. I just want you to hear this. All right. It says, it's basically this person saying the Church of God group stated that the label Negroes is erroneous, right? Incorrect, right? Calling them Negroes is saying it's incorrect, right? That's for the sake of understanding, because they are actually Judeans, right? That's what they're trying to explain there.
Their ritual and religious practices consisted of ceremonies prescribed by Cherry himself, who referred to them as the Holy Writings. He had a clergy and religious services started with the beating of a drum. The faithful studied Hebrew, and Cherry had a Bible in Yiddish and in Hebrew, although services were not celebrated in the latter language. So anyway, that gets into Cherry. Now, Nefertiti claims this history isn't there, but yet we're seeing all throughout American history and all throughout other history, from the 1600s, the 1400s, all the way up till now, black people called Israelites, Israelites called black. But let's keep going, because I got a couple more pages to get through on here. So we're going to go to page 230. All right, let me get to page 230. 228, 29, and 30. Actually, no, let me start from right here. Page 228. Now, this is super important because remember, Nefertiti said that there is no connection there. We have no reason to believe this. We're making up the history. So is there any connection between the black Jews of Portugal and the people on West Africa? We've seen that there's tons of it. But now, here we're going to see something interesting. The slave trade began in the 15th century with the discovery of the black continent and reached its apogee in the first half of the 19th century. This trade was essentially organized through the stations, ports, and warehouses which encircled the black African coast line like an iron belt. Places such as Arguin, Kori, and the islands of Lo Ilmena. Anyway, we'll come all the way down here, right? Andries of Juda and Benin, the coast of Leongo and Angola. There's a bunch of lists. It's a list of African places.
You can just see that term, Juda and Benin. That's on right there on that map. Right there in that same location.
The sector was renowned for its provision.
Just for the sake of reflection, it's just pointing out that spot, right here. This was taken over. It was here, right? This was at first the kingdom of Judah while they were there. So you can see it's very important to understand this little map. Also, what's important about this map, actually go down to it. So this map is actually it was made long ago, but it's based on a longer time ago for the sake of understanding when you look at some of the information on this map. But just for clarity, this is the area that it's talking about. Talk about this area as he has showed earlier. But let me close these. Let's leave that there.
Vision of very specific human material. That's important. The Kayor blacks lead revolts. The Bambara were stupid, gentle, and tough. The blacks of the Gold Coast and Ouida were good farmers, but had suicidal tendencies, and the Congola were gay and good workers. The Negro common money, a promissory note which could be counted on, a bill of exchange which discouraged a debt of nature.
So basically what they're describing is that the ones described as Negro, which we just seen the definitions showing that the Hamites are not the Negro, saying the Negro, these Judeans, these ones were blessed, that wherever work they did was blessed. As we remember, Jacob, whatever he did was blessed. So they're saying that these were sure money. They were common money. It says they were a sure thing, that they was a great way to make money.
Human flesh was the standard of merchant values. So they were using Israelites as currency.
It's crazy.
I'm not making this stuff up. Isn't that what they did in America? The standard of negotiation was the Peace of India, which meant a Negro who conformed to calibrated physical criteria. How many Negroes were sold in this way? Quinnell, in his thesis on the black slave trade, estimates a total of some 80 million. But it could be argued that some 100 million men and women were torn from Africa from the 15th century onwards.
Now you see why is this important, these numbers? Millions and millions and millions of them. Why is this important? Because we did a video previously, and we had talked about the bottleneck. It's very, if you don't understand that, if you seen that one, didn't understand it, if you didn't see it, interesting video about the bottleneck. Right? It talks about how is it that supposedly there was a million of them, then all of a sudden it was a small amount. The evidence is only shown this way. The other way doesn't work. That's where you get that bottleneck with the Ashkenazi. But let's continue. All right. So I just had to reset. Now let's get back to what this thing is talking about for the sake of understanding. I wish I could remove this background thing. I'm not sure how to remove it, but it looks like it's this, but I have no idea how it works. Sometimes these things are that it just changes the color of the background, but it doesn't remove it. Maybe I could do something like that. All right, that's work. Let's just work with that for the sake of understanding. I wish that it wouldn't shrink, but let's go. Let's keep going.
Meant a Negro who conformed to calibrated physical criteria. How many Negroes were sold in this way? Quinnell, in his thesis on the black slave trade, estimates a total of some 80 million. But it could be argued that some 100 million men and women were torn from Africa from the 15th century onwards. Didn't the Most High say he's going to make Israel like the sand of the sea? And he scattered everybody, and he left few in number. This stuff is all biblical. In North America, only the southern states had a climate that the blacks could survive, and the southern planters employed them Let me see. Let me read that again. In North America, only the southern states had a climate that the blacks could survive, and the southern planters employed them in such massive numbers that at the time of the War of Independence, the populations of the most prosperous regions of the United States were half black. How did regions of the United States go from half black to now we're 13% of the population? When he arrived, the Negro was firstly deprived of his name. Read Psalms 82.
Here was just said there. When he arrived, the Judeans, the Negro, right? The Negro, blacks, they were derived of their name, right? That's why it says they were taken of their name, separated their family and other tribes.
83 conspiracy. Matter of fact, let me go to Blue Letter Bible. Yeah.
All right. Think Jeremiah 17:4, right?
I ain't want to search for Jesus on the Bible. Let me see. Psalms. Psalms 83. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. You can go through and read that. Taylor Ministries has a great breakdown of that. But the fact is, they were using Israelites as currency. It says when he arrived, the Negro was firstly deprived of his name, separated from his family and others of his tribe. Isn't that what you're seeing going on in America with the people of the border? The anonymity of servitude, the dispersion and rapid rotation of workers automized them to such an extent that they became absolutely alienated objects. This is how you really erase a people's culture. No social reference existed among these herds of slaves. They became social aliens, talliable and workable at pleasure. In the 18th century, some Europeans began to talk of genocide, a race war. In England, it was the
Hear what it just said there? See how it says they're talking of a genocide? Do you know that's a scripture? Let's look at something real fast. I just want to go to something and show you. Let's see. I want to show you this one right here. Watch what it says right here. I'm going to go to the text and I'm going to read it to you. And remember how we went over that breakdown on how Grecia is actually going to be pointed out to the European, right? I just want you to hear this so you can understand what it's going to say here, because it breaks it down in a way where you can understand, just like how it talks about a bastard shall live in Ashdod. That's a little play on words for the sake of understanding. But let's go down and look at something. Let's look at this. Right here, right? Watch what it says here. It's talking about the time that Messiah redeems them, and then later on until he gathers his people, where the Lord saves the people at the end. Watch what it says right here. It says, as for thee also, by the blood of thy covenant, because it's talking about the Messiah, by the blood of his covenant, have I sent forth thy prisoners out of the pit, wherein is no water. That's actually illustrating during the time of, as we know, the sequence of events, right? What does the sequence of events tell us? It says about the time of the bottomless pit, that's when the Lord is going to gather the people, because it says the woman is going to go into the wilderness. That's actually illustrating the 12 tribes of Israel going into the wilderness for the sake of understanding. That's illustrating that event is actually written down, right? It says that they're going to be gathered. Let's actually go to that sequence. Let's go down to that sequence of events. This is like, as you see, working together, you can get a lot of things manifested for the sake of understanding. So this right here is just an order of Revelation, just talking about every single thing in Revelation. But let's go down, just like how we put right here. Remember, we talked about the Islamic slave trade, and then at the sixth seal, why is it Israel being sealed, right? At the sixth seal. Why is it Israel being sealed at the sixth seal, for the sake of understanding, right? Why is this happening? Let's keep going down, right? If we go at the woman in the wilderness, what's one of the most important things we know? It happens after the bottomless pit. No matter what, Israel goes in the wilderness after the bottomless pit. So notice how it says it right there, right? He says, I have sent forth thy prisoners out of the pit wherein is no water. Turn you to the stronghold, you prisoners of hope. Even today do I declare I will render double unto thee, right? Watch what he says here. When I have bent Judah for me, right? If you look at the statistics right now, what people are mainly believers of Christ, you will easily see that Judah is bent towards the Lord as it's fulfilled. And filled the bow with Ephraim. As we know, Ephraim was a cake. It means they were mixed. Basically destroyed a lot of them. And raised up, watch what it says here, thy sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece, right? Race war. That's what you're seeing. Like at first it was a lot of them. Then it came to race war. Commonly, we all know this had happened. There was a common race war where it was like blacks only, whites only. That's what we're seeing here. That's what he's saying there. That they became against each other. So and then made thee as a sword of a mighty man, because it's illustrated in the end. The Lord's going to strengthen His people, right? So, but let's keep going. Watch what happens here.
Of the religious groups such as the Quakers and Methodists, which produced the anti-slave movement. In 1834, all of the slaves in the British Empire were freed. It was not until 1865 that the law for the abolition of slavery in the USA was voted in. The abolition of slavery, giving freedom, returned some human dignity. But anyway, we'll see all of this. But anyway, let's see. They became men, members of a society in which they had acquired potential rights. But what had to be resolved was the painful question of their origins and their identity.
See what it's saying there? When the people were released, that wasn't resolved. But what had to be resolved was the painful question of their origins and their identity.
Who were they? They had indeed come from Africa, but from what part of Africa? So when you call us African American, that's not sufficient. Calling us African is not sufficient. Cambridge University knew that was not sufficient. Ulysses Santa Maria knew that was not sufficient. Yes, they're African, but from what part of Africa? Who were their ancestors? What were their tribes, their ethnic groups? An oral tradition which partially existed allowed some of them to remember their land. Coming from the country where the river runs, originally from the banks of the great water. Didn't we talk about the Niger? The memories of the motherland were there in their culture, and this Negro identification was expressed and conserved in music.
Where was it? We understand what he's saying there? All they remembered was the river. Do you hear what he's saying there? All they remembered when they were freed was the river, right? Do you know that that's a scripture? Let's go to Psalms 130. This is the most heaviest Psalms, right? 137, right? Look what it reads here, right? Now it's important to understand this is all symbol. David didn't see Jerusalem fall, except in the spirit. Watch what it says here. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yeah, we wept when we remembered Zion. See what he's saying there? By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yeah, we wept when we remembered the rivers of Zion. Also, look at this. I want you to see something. I want you to see something fairly interesting. You can see an interesting course that talks about something really interesting when you look at the river. Because remember what the scripture says, that the people will go into where? Into Egypt, back into Egypt. If you look at the Mississippi River, what you'll quickly see is something very, very, very interesting. That river is going to be known where a lot of slaves were around that area. So notice the play. Notice the play on words of this area. Because remember what the scripture said, they would go back into Egypt on slave ships, right? So this is actually what they're saying. You know, how would they sing the Lord's? Notice how it's talking about almost like they're lost, right? Notice how they're singing that song. It says, for a day that carried us away captive require us a song, right? They that wasted us require us of a mirror, the singing song of Zion, right? How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land, right? See what it's saying there? There's a lot of play on words in these things for the sake of understanding. But, you know, these are some things to consider. It gets really deep for the sake of understanding, but that's just Another thing we'll talk about another time. But just to see, talks about that Nile River and whatnot. But let's continue.
But there was a need. It was a vital necessity to recreate a genealogical, historical past to fill in the great emptiness of slavery. So then there was the development, the elaboration of a whole mythic history and mythology. Now, listen to what they say. Black America.
So it's important to understand that, see how it's saying that their history that they later got was fake, right? When we understand, like when they say African American, Negro, all those things, black, and they try to make your own little background and everything, looking at all the evidence, we know that they were actually the Israelites. But let's proceed.
Folklore reveals through its dominant themes the everyday myth of the American blacks, alongside what we have called a historical origin. Since it is substantial by verifiable evidence, a whole mythic origin of the movement of Black American Jewishness was created. Now, this is what they claim. Let me see. This is what the original claim was. Now, listen as it goes on. Actually, I'm going to pause it right here, and I'm going to do another part to this since it's going a little bit longer than I expected. So I'm going to stop it right here, and then I'll come back and record the next part. All right, so here we go. We know that the Jewish religion is one which is passed from parents to children, and that it is a fundamental ingredient in the cohesion of the group. When one studies the Jewish religion, it is clear how much it serves as the armature, the context for society. In the case of Black Judaism, the study of the significance of religious life and social life can help to rediscover traces of a more ancient Judaism that some African groups could have adopted and that could have been conserved by their slave descendants on American soil. See, they assume this was adopted, but as we've read in older documents, these Jews were black. Were there black slaves who were Jewish through religion who maintained the faith of their ancestors after they had been forcibly transported to America? If we're making this history up, Nefertiti, why are they talking about slaves preserving their Jewish religion from their ancestors? They maintain their faith of their ancestors. But you say we have no cause to believe this. We know we're descended from those same slaves. Only through an analysis of the mythology of the Jewish African origins of the Black Hebrews will this become clear. The following are major sources that need to be considered in such an analysis. A. Witnesses. Tales of the explorers who mention the existence of communities of black Jews on the African continent, and particularly in areas where slave ships picked up the black slaves. That's what we've been doing. We've been looking at the explorers and the cartographers, the everything.
So you see what it's saying there? He's saying the following are major sources that need to be considered in such an analysis. So it's saying to analyze to see if these people, for the sake of understanding now that they are free and they're returning back to Judaism and returning back to the ways of the Lord for the sake of understanding, and obviously having the Messiah with us for the sake of understanding, we have to realize that the information that they're saying, these things have to be taken into consideration. The things that we see previously, all the evidence.
And this is what Cambridge University says we need to consider. B, rites and customs which have more or less explicit analogies with those of Judaism. C, the semantics and the dialectology of some African societies reveal some features comparable with those of Judaism. D, the deductions and conclusions of anthropological and sociological work done in Africa. Now, listen to this. It is well known that 500 years before Islam, Judaism was in Africa. Anybody that tells you there were no Israelites in Africa is lying to you. Travelers' tales and the stories of journeys across North Africa, the Sahara, and the Sudan provide considerable evidence of the existence of Jewish communities on the African continent. We know from the time of St. Jerome, 340 to 420. This is 340 AD. This is 4th and 5th century after Christ. A chain of Jewish commercial towns stretched almost uninterrupted from Mauritania to India. St. Augustine learned Hebrew in Tanzim, where there were a Judeo-Christian colony with some from Cyrenaica. These groups went as far as Akkar in the southern Sahara, and according to the Chronicles of the Sudan, the dynasty of the kings of Ghana, didn't I mention Ghana a few minutes ago, originated in this group. So now we got kings of Ghana, We got Igbos in Nigeria, all around the area called Juda. And then we have Europeans transporting them as slaves to other places, Europe and the Americas. Jewish contacts and influences with Black Africa were also noted by the Arab geographers Ibn Koab and El-Bekri, who stated that the roots of the trans-Saharan trade, in which Jewish caravans and interpreters were involved, culminated in Ghana and in the lower valley of the Senegal River. In the 12th century, El-Idrisi, the Andalusian geographer, let's go back here. Who?
See, I was quoting that person.
Idrisi. Right there. Idrisi. The Nubian geographer. According to Idrisi, the land hereabout was peopled by Jews. So we see Idrisi mentioned there, right? Let me get back to it. Here we go. Right here. In the 12th century, El-Idrisi, the Andalusian geographer, also cited the Hebrew colony of Lam, which we just looked at, located 200 miles from Timbuktu, and the existence of 2 Jewish towns on the Niger. Didn't the other source say there were Jewish settlements on both sides of the Niger? 200 miles from Timbuktu, yet they say they debunked from Babylon to Timbuktu. So there's Jews 200 miles from Timbuktu. Then 1 century later, Haji and Agwadi added this. There is a race of people in Togurt called Majaharaya who are converted Jews. Their women speak Hebrew in order to not be understood. From this period onwards, there was a very significant Jewish influence throughout North Africa, to such an extent that Dominican missionaries had to learn Hebrew and Arabic. But what about the south of this margin of Saharan contacts? In the reign of John II of Portugal, again, this is John II. You see it spelled different. This is King John of Portugal. Nearly 700 Jews were taken from their kin and deported to the island of Sao Tome on the west coast of Africa. So now we get a specific number, 700. This island is close to Nigeria, Cameroon, and Gabon. Escaping from Sao Tome, the Jews immigrated to the coast of Angola between 1484 and 1499. So now they're spreading all across Africa. Nefertiti and the rest of the urban apologists want us to believe white people are just spreading all over Africa, all over the west coast of Africa. Show us the evidence. Show us the historical documents of this. They must have settled in several Portuguese colonies and over the centuries mixed with the indigenous black population. So now the Jews are there and they're saying they're mixing with the black population. But Nefertiti said these are white Jews. Near the Congo and Gabon in 1776, black Jews called Bavumba, or even Mavambo, Mayambo, May, or Mavumba, lived on the coast of Lango by the river named Rio Muni. It would seem that they adopted Christianity at the same time as maintaining their Judaism. So much for that theory that we were only forced into Christianity by slavery. Now, when I say Christianity, they probably followed what was in the Bible, not the European version of it. By 1847, David Livingstone discovered a group of educated blacks. And this is important right here. This is a very important. Nefertiti. I want you to pay close attention to this part right here. Everybody share this with Nefertiti. Send this to Nefertiti right here. This part right here. By 1847, Dr. Livingstone discovered a group of educated blacks living in the interior some 200 miles from the coast of Luando. These blacks were called the Jews of Angola. These blacks were called the Jews of Angola. They were good merchants, learned easily, and had a knowledge of Portuguese law and history. They had a knowledge of Portuguese law and history.
Because they were sent from Portuguese, right? Because that's what we have to understand, that a lot of them that were in Portuguese, as it said, actually all of them that was in that area up there, they were sent down to Africa. It's kind of like they were all just pushed together and just to fulfill the scripture, just to fulfill it. As it said, they would go back the way they came, and from there they would go into slave ships into all nations. Well, let's proceed.
Why is that important? Often employs clerks and writers. For Livingstone, there was no doubt but that these people were the descendants of those who had been deported from Portugal in the 15th century. Other evidence supports his intuition. Let me read that again for you, Nefertiti. For all you urban apologists out there that are riding with Nefertiti on this white Jews, European Jews in Africa, let me read this again for you. Because this is a direct link that specifically says the Portuguese Jews were black, and these are the same people that were in Africa, that the descendants of the people that were deported from Portugal into Africa. I'm going to read it one more time. In 1847, David Livingstone discovered a group of educated blacks living in the interior, some 200 miles from the coast of Luando. These blacks were called the Jews of Angola. They were good merchants, learned easily, and had a knowledge for Portuguese law and history. They were often employed as clerks and writers for Livingstone. There was no doubt but that these people were the descendants of those who had been deported from Portugal in the 15th century. Other evidence supports his intuition. In savage Africa, Winwood Reade writes of having met in Guinea blacks claiming to be Portuguese around 1864. But didn't Nefertiti say these were Europeans? But the Europeans are saying they're black. Who's lying, Nefertiti or these Europeans from Cambridge University? Who's lying to you? Why is Nefertiti lying? Why are the urban apologists lying? Closer to our time, Dr. J. Kreppel noted sometime after the First World War that a large community of black Jews existed in the interior of Dahomey. Dahomey used to be known as Benin, the kingdom of Dahomey. The kingdom of Dahomey was here.
So you know what area is picking out, right? Just again with that cross reference, you can remember. Just talking about that same area on that map. Just point out that area that was first called the Kingdom of Judah. So I'm gonna zoom out. You can see this is that same area, right? You can see the river right there. This is that area right here. You can see that little corner right there, and there it is. So that's what he's showing right here. That area right there.
I'm sorry, I said that backwards. But you know what I mean. Benin used to be known as the kingdom of Dahomey. Dahomey was here. This is where Nefertiti went to that voodoo priest, and he said nobody knows of Judah here. Nobody heard of Judah here. Ain't that what he said? Y'all heard him say it. But right here it says there was a community of black Jews that was living in the interior of Dahomey. They invaded Judah. We read that. These Jews, as a matter of fact, let me go back one more time. I'll make sure, because I don't want you guys to miss nothing. Kingdom of Dahomey, whose prince subdued the states of Arda and Witta about the year 1724. So right here in the slave coast, slave coast, there is a kingdom or a community. Closer to our time, Dr. J. Kreppel noted that sometime after the First World War, that a large community of black Jews existed in the interior of Dahomey. These Jews had the 5 books of Moses written on old parchment in Hebrew. But Nefertiti said, we're making this stuff up. All these disparate elements are evidence of the permanent presence of a Jewish tradition within African ethnic groups, which had at one time been in contact with the Jews who came from the Mediterranean, were converted, and had kept their faith and the way of life. Now, see, understand this. They assumed that this was conversion, but everything we've pointed to, everything we've seen, the ancient Jews are called black. And I'm going to show you in a future video that it is the white Jews who converted and even paid black Jews to teach them the customs. Yes, that is documented. So if Nefertiti wants to hold on to this lie of white Jews, she's going to continue to get destroyed over and over and over again and proven to be a liar. And every other urban apologist with her, including Damon Richardson, until they come out and say what Eric Mason said, no white people were involved in the writing of that book. But they want to say that somehow these black Jews became white. So now, we'll go down and read. This is the last page I'm going to read on this one. With the contemporary period, a totally different attitude is evident among explorers, sociologists, and anthropologists. They do not merely state the existence of black Jewish communities, but they attempt to analyze the customs, morals, rights, and languages of African societies to draw conclusions and advance hypotheses. J. Leighton Wilson was a missionary for 18 years in Africa. In his work, Western Africa, Its History, Condition, and Prospects, London, 1856, he states that in Senegambia, religion was a mixture of paganism, Judaism, and Islam, and that it is difficult to define the areas of influence of each of the three religions. In northern Guinea, paganism and Judaism were closely intertwined, and in the south, there were more traces of Christianity. He based his conclusions on the existence of some customs which seemed to him to be remnants of Judaism: circumcision, the division of the tribes into 12 large families, the strict prohibition on marriage between families that were too closely linked, sacrifices, which involved smearing of blood on the altars and the lintels of the doorways, periods of mourning which involved shaving the head and wearing dirty clothes, possessions by demons, and purifications. He was unable to get any references or precise explanations from the natives as to the origins of these traditional practices, and it is thus possible to see here Jewish influences. It is also possible that in West Africa, the Ashanti of the Gold Coast had also been influenced by Judaism, and there were traces of this in some of their beliefs and customs. She said, we're making all this stuff up. They're saying all over Africa. It's Jews all over Africa. They're in the interior, they're in the exterior, they're everywhere. They got circumcision and sacrifices and all this stuff going on. The slaves are saying we're Israelites. People are saying they're black, and Nefertiti's over here saying, nah, they're Europeans. This evidence don't exist. You have to close your eyes and scroll through Google to miss all of this stuff. The patrilineal system is common to the two societies, Jewish and Ashanti. Among the Ashanti, the marriage of girls is subject to the same rules as those of the girls in the Southad who married the son of their father's uncle. The Ashanti's marriage ceremony was identical to that of the ancient Hebrews, and is simple. The price of marriage, including the offering of wine, the presentation and acceptance of presents, were all that were required as formalities. Among the Ashanti, the period of a mother's impurity lasted for a week after the birth and was terminated by the Natia ritual, when the young Ashanti recites his own name, and on the 14th day, there's another ceremony for purification. So, we see that there are Israelites all over West Africa. They assume that these are converts, and yet we see the rituals are closely practiced because they were passed down. They didn't learn this from another culture and just keep it. They are the original, the real deal. How do we know? Because we've traced it all the way back to Spain and Portugal, and it said they got there because they were Babylonian exiles.
So you see that, what it's showing you there? These are even those that were taken all the way in the, like we talked about, not all of them were gathered, because even during the Babylonian exile. So that's very, very important for sake of understanding. But let's proceed. As you can see, we only have about 20 minutes left on it.
See, this is why I have no respect for a lot of urban apologists, because they're not truthful. They said, go back, what did Nefertiti say? Because there is neither biblical, or she says, I don't believe we're the true Hebrews, because there is neither biblical or historical evidence to suggest we are. We just proved that to be a lie. Only misinterpreted verses and revising of history. Tell me if you saw me revise anything. They ignore verses in history that proves them wrong, creates fantasies about a history that doesn't exist. And yet, we saw read what we read. Time and time again, an analytical approach to their evidence reveals it's faulty. This is a habit with Hebrew Israelites. So anyway, let's keep going. Cambridge University Press. We just read that. So now, we're gonna come over here. We're gonna jump out of the slave trade stuff. Where we at? Black Jews Religious Challenge. All right, we just read that. All right, so I was gonna show the video on the live, but yeah, the live wasn't working, as you guys know. All right, so now this is the Slave Voyages database. Let me see here.
So this part,
Explore the World. Where's the about?
I'll just let it play.
Because I don't want them to say, well, this is just something y'all put together, or, some stupid stuff they say. Now, I'm going to read this to you. About the project. The transatlantic and intra-American slave trade databases are the culmination of several decades of independent and collaborative research by scholars, drawing upon data in libraries and archives around the Atlantic world. The New Voyages website itself is the product of 3 years of development by a multidisciplinary team of historians, librarians, curriculum specialists, cartographers, computer programmers, and web designers, in coalition with scholars of the slave trade from the universities in Europe, Africa, South America, and North America. The National Endowment for the Humanities was the principal sponsor of this work, carried out at Emory Center for Digital Scholarship. the University of California at Irvine, the University of California at Santa Cruz, the Hutchinson Center at Harvard University has also provided support. Just want you guys to understand what we're about to look at and who was put together by. So when the urban apologists come say something ridiculous like, well, you guys are making this stuff up, you can see we're not. So this slave names database, African names database, slavevoyages.com or .org, this is going to be in the description, 91,491 records. Now, this is important because we're going to see something. Freetown. I want to Google Freetown and show you guys Freetown. Freetown is in Africa. It's where people who were freed from slavery were taken and they were freed. Freetown is a port city in the capital, Sierra Leone, in West Africa. It's known for its beaches and historical role in the transatlantic slave trade. The old town's centuries-old cotton tree is a symbol of emancipation. On the waterfront is the King's Yard's gate through which former slaves walked to freedom. It's called Freetown. The reason I'm mentioning Freetown is because you will see the disembarkation is Freetown for a lot of these. Now, if you go to place of embarkation, disembarkation, and you put in Freetown, remember there's 91,491 records. 81,009 of those are in Freetown. So these are people who were saved from slavery, not records of all the people who actually made it to all the other places. Remember, they estimated 80 to 100 million. We just read that. So now there's 91,000 in these records. Now, I want to show you guys something. So let me take off this disembarkation and place of embarkation. We'll go here. Oh, you know what? Place of origin. Let's type in Igbo. Igbo. Igbo or Igbo. Now, how to pronounce Igbo.
The rest of this, for the sake of understanding, this slave database, this is very interesting because it just goes over like a lot of information, specific information.
You guys can hear this through my computer.
I'm just gonna skip a little ahead.
That you know their origin, you know their gender.
He just pulls up some, and he shows like pretty much how you can find them and different things like that. Put in different names and find them. It's basically a little tool you can use to find different things like that.
Pull from. A lot of these people are pulled from the very places that they claim that they sent the black Jews from Portugal. So anyway, if you guys have questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments.
That end tool is really interesting. But for the sake of understanding, just to sequence it all together, this is the best way to sequence it all together for the sake of understanding. Because when we actually understand what's actually being said right here, we got to understand that everything that you've seen here, every single thing that you've seen here is verified. Everything here as you've seen here was verified. All these things were as straight and forward as you can get, right? We got the imagery, we got the GPS studies, we got the scientists, all the scientific studies, we got the actual history, we got all the facts, all these things that come up together and brings harmony to truth, right? I just want to go down and I want to show you something here. Actually, it's up here. All right, so I just want to show you one more thing. Just one more thing for the sake of understanding. I'm not going to play this whole thing, but I want you to see one part on here that I think is very interesting that he shows on here.
Grammatical mistakes.
So I'm not going to play this whole thing, just this article. Just this one article right here in the front.
See that right here, Library of Congress, loc.gov. This is the Library of Congress. And right here, the Houston Daily Post, volume, it doesn't say, September 20th, 1897, mailable edition, image 1. So again, Library of Congress. Now, Pastor Kelly was on, he only showed a partial, like a snippet of this. And he didn't go over the whole thing. So I was like, you know what, I want to go read that whole section of text for myself. So that's exactly what I did. And so this actually happens 18 years after another text that I've previously shown you guys. And I'm going to show you that here. So there's an 18-year difference between this text and the other text. All right, let me enlarge this. It says, Negro who can write Hebrew He is deaf and dumb and comes from an African town. So that just means he cannot hear and he cannot talk, for those that don't know what the word dumb means. I'm pretty sure most people know what the word deaf means. All right. It says Hartford, Connecticut, September 19th. A young African Negro has been in this city for the last few days who claims to be a Hebrew. He is deaf and dumb and as black as the ace of spades. He carries a pad of paper with him and answers all questions by writing them in Hebrew and Lashon Kodesh. What excites the most wonder is that he writes Lashon Kodesh very rapidly. It is the language of the books of Moses and is made a special study of, spoken and written with ease only by the rabbis and highly educated Hebrews. The Negro was sent to one of the rabbis of Hartford, who is perfectly satisfied that he is a Hebrew. He says that he came from a large town in Africa where there is a tribe of about 20,000 black Hebrews who speak Lashon Kodesh and are quite prosperous. He also says that his father is a rabbi in that town, and that is why his father took the trouble to teach him to write these languages, which needed an extra amount of labor on account of his being deaf and dumb. He says his people not only write Lashon Kodesh, but is their speaking language as well. He left home a few years ago and has seen a good deal of the world. In each town, he hunts up the Jewish section, and there they give him clothes, food, and money. What surprises him, he writes, is that no Hebrew knows of his countrymen in Africa. All right, I'm going to pause there. Did everybody hear that? I just want to make sure before I go on and get too far in, and then you guys tell me you couldn't hear me the whole time.
So just for a sake, this is a really interesting one too that goes over stuff, but I'm not going to go over this one. But just know there is more information that even if you wanted to, I don't think you can find it all, but yet it will be in sequence harmony. And that's how you find truth. Understand that. The way you find truth is in a sequence where everything harmonizes to truth, for the sake of understanding. And that's what we have. We have a great harmony of truth for all these things, for the sake of understanding. You can see even this has some little information. But as you can see, these are things that we have and have recorded. Therefore, evidence shows the original Judah is brown. Very important to understand that. We're talking Judah, Benjamin, right? What happened with Paul? He said, aren't you that Egyptian? Messiah went into Egypt, right? We also got Moses, who also was said he looked like an Egyptian. When they seen Joseph, he looked just like an Egyptian. For the sake of understanding, there's nothing new under the sun. So if there's truth to anything, one person is either 100% truth or one person is either 100% lie. And it just so happens that the whole world, as it says, as a snare, it's going to take the whole world today, almost all of it, almost, besides those that are waking up. The whole world today have forgotten, understand this, have forgotten the deep and confirmed historical evidence that tells us who are the real Judeans. So with that, family, if you have any questions, definitely let me know. But other than that, that was the live for today. There's going to be a very important information that we may reflect to in other days. So with that, family, be blessed, be beloved, and amen.